He had to judge what would happen by imagining how it would affect Tang Mi. John had taken only a shallow sip when the emerald liquid began to erode him from the inside out. If a single taste could unmake him like this, Tang Mi would have been driven insane long before finishing the bowl. Lord Voldemort was a genius. There was no doubt about that. It was almost a pity he hadn't applied his talents to something less cruel. He could have made a very efficient minister of justice. Instead, he had devised this. John staggered, hand clamped around the stone basin to keep from falling. Pain contorted his face, and Tang Mi rushed forward, but John barked at him, voice ragged. "Do your duty. I won't die. Voldemort isn't merciful enough to let me die so easily." John knew Voldemort well enough to understand what he wanted. He did not merely want people dead, he wanted them to suffer. As the potion worked, his head split with memory and agony, thoughts collapsing and being reassembled, yet he forced his features into a mask and scooped another bowl without hesitation. He tipped it to his lips and drank it all. Not a drop spilled. The level in the basin fell. There was no other way. If he gave any of it to Tang Mi, it would be useless. They had to see it through. He instructed Tang Mi with a clarity that made the command worse. "No matter what happens, make me drink every last bowl. Even if I beg, don't be soft." "My lord." Tang Mi clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened, then nodded. John took the third bowl. Cramping seized his fingers. The pain was no longer only in his mind. Images kept bursting before his eyes like shards. Old torments flooded back, and a low cry escaped him as he gripped the basin until his palms burned. If the basin weren't an enchanted object, it would have broken. He forced himself through the fourth bowl, closing his eyes to block the horror. But his hand shook, and when he brought the cup to his mouth, his arm would not obey. He looked at Tang Mi, not pleading to be saved, but pleading with him to keep his promise. The sight nearly broke Tang Mi. His eyes reddened, breath coming in ragged gasps. He gripped John's hand, brought the bowl to his lips, and John drank. The expression on his face turned to pure terror. This time he had no strength to steady himself. He toppled and nearly rolled into the lake. "My lord!" Tang Mi lunged and caught him, eyes rimmed with red and a wild look to them. John grabbed him suddenly, voice choked, a single word, "Drink." Tang Mi trembled all over as he scooped again. John, who had had iron will, was slipping. After the fifth bowl, he could no longer speak. His body convulsed. He did not notice the stone cutting into his skin. It was as if 100 dementors were sucking every scrap of soul from him. He wanted to scream for mercy, but could not make a sound. Blood glistened at the corner of his mouth where he had bitten himself. "My lord, please, you can't. Stop," Tang Mi begged, voice breaking. He wanted John to cry out for release. Even one sentence of pleading would have let him take John away from here. The sixth bowl forced a thin line between John's lips and the potion seeped in. He drank it in agonizing, slow gulps. Tang Mi pleaded to leave, but John did not answer. Every time he moved to scoop the next bowl, his hands shook so violently, Tang Mi cursed at himself and at his cowardice. Then, in a cruel, resolute act, he bit his own forearm until blood came. The pain steadied him enough to pour the eighth bowl. By now the basin was nearly empty. John clamped his jaw. His mouth would not open. Tang Mi forced it and shoved a finger between John's teeth to keep them from crushing it. The liquid slid down. John clenched, and pain bit the finger that kept his mouth forced. Sweat streamed down Tang Mi's face, but he did not remove his grip. He scooped the ninth bowl and poured it in. John finally made a sound, an awful, wrenching cry. "Let me leave." His mental defenses had been broken. Tang Mi held him down through the scream, scraping the bowl on the basin's bottom until only a thin film remained. "It's almost over, my lord. Almost," he whispered, voice raw. He poured the last of the potion into John. As the final drop ran down, John's Adam's apple bobbed once, twice, and then his whole body went still. "My lord, wake up!" Tang Mi threw the cup aside and began a frantic litany of charms, wand flashing. "Enervate!" he cried. "Restore vitality! Enervate!" The spells met no response. John lay inert. Tang Mi's voice cracked and then broke into a keening sob. He lost control completely and screamed, a sound that tore at the night. At the edge of the black lake, pale hands rose and grasped for John's ankle. Inferi, cold and inexorable, dragging towards the water. Tang Mi spun, casting everything he had to repel them, eyes wide and rimmed in red by tears and fury. More and more Inferi crawled up from the depths, an endless tide. While Tang Mi fought, a small rat, concealed on the island, ran for the stone basin. The emerald liquid that had filled it was gone. In its place lay a golden locket. The rat grabbed the locket between its tiny teeth, eyes glittering with triumph, and stared at the motionless man. Hatred pulsed in its beady gaze. It prepared to flee, intending to let the Inferi drag both down and be rid of them, when John, who had seemed utterly still, opened his eyes. The rat's fur stood on end. Chapter 246, The Maze and the Whirlpool. The third task of the Triwizard Tournament was about to begin. Professors Hagrid, Moody, McGonagall, and Flitwick entered the arena to inspect the maze. They checked for ambushes, for dangerous creatures, and even examined the Goblet of Fire itself. Satisfied that there were no hidden threats, they allowed the champions to enter. "Where's John?" Daphne asked, not looking at John, but at the spot behind Heinrich. "He had to take care of something," Heinrich said, staring down into the maze. "He told us to stay on guard." Daphne frowned. John didn't make idle warnings. "Does he think something will happen?" "Perhaps," Heinrich replied, non-committal. Their seats were close to the entrance, and they kept a wary watch over the labyrinth below. At Ludo Bagman's summons, the four champions stepped into the stadium. McGonagall addressed them sternly, though the red stars on the professor's hats betrayed that this was not the time for levity. Even Hagrid's big red star was pinned to the back of his rough waistcoat. "We will be patrolling around the outside of the maze," she said. "If you run into trouble and need rescuing, send red sparks into the air and someone will come. Do you understand?" After the Merpeople incident, the organizers had tightened safety measures. The champions nodded. "Good luck, Harry," Hagrid whispered. He meant it quietly, but the champions were standing very close together, and his words carried. Chapter 222. Fleur rolled her eyes, nudged Cedric with her elbow, and said in a displeased voice, "Are you even a Hogwarts student? It feels like no one talks to you." She had learned during her time at Hogwarts why Slytherins always complained about the professor's bias. They were all champions, yet Cedric was treated like a stepchild. Cedric gave a wry smile and signaled Fleur with his eyes to stop. Hagrid's face flushed at being called out. He hadn't known Cedric well. And, sheepish, he stepped forward to greet him. Harry heard Fleur's remark. It wasn't aimed at him, but it still left him a little uncomfortable. Hagrid hurried off, and Moody came up to Harry, gruffly. "You did it, Harry." He lowered his voice, so only Harry could hear. "You're in excellent condition. Looks like you've been studying very hard." He winked with his good eye. Harry nodded seriously. "Professor Moody, thank you for your encouragement." Moody patted Harry's shoulder, then, after a pause, ruffled his hair. The gesture made Harry uneasy. Professor McGonagall appeared, her face stern. "Professor Moody, we need to go." "All right. See you later, Harry." Moody waved, and Fleur rolled her eyes again. Ludo Bagman amplified his voice with a sonorous charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, the final task of the Triwizard Tournament is about to begin." He announced the scores. Hogwarts' champions in first and second, which brought a round of applause. Only Karkaroff and Madame Maxime clapped half-heartedly. Heinrich, watching Moody's earlier actions, narrowed his eyes. He turned to Daphne. "Keep an eye on things here." Daphne glanced after him, startled. "Where are you going?" "I need to confirm something," Heinrich said, and slipped out of the stadium. Malfoy and Neville came up from behind, breathless. "Now, Cedric, listen for my whistle," Malfoy instructed. Bagman counted down. At the sound of the whistle, Cedric went in first. After a pause, Harry followed. Fleur and Crumb entered later. Cedric's first obstacle was a blast-ended scroot, its scorpion-like tail scorched at his pant leg. He used a shattering spell to deal with it, then found a hedge wall blocking the next path and had to backtrack. Hagrid had released a number of dangerous magical creatures into the maze. Harry ran into a boggart and, thinking it a Dementor at first, fired off a Patronus charm. The creature staggered back, robes flying, which told Harry it wasn't a real Dementor. He changed the spell to Ridiculous and drove the boggart away. The maze's twists and turns disoriented him. A sudden gasp broke the sounds of the maze. Fleur. The hedge trembled, and Cedric burst out from behind it. For a second, he and Harry exchanged looks. Harry understood and ran in the direction Cedric indicated. The sound came from over there, Cedric called, and the two dashed into a golden mist. The world flipped on its head. They were disoriented. We need to get there fast, Cedric said, taking a step forward, and the world snapped back to normal. They reached a crossroads. A red light flashed. Crumb lurched backwards. What happened? Cedric asked, frowning, as Fleur stared at Crumb. He ambushed me, she said bitterly, but I was ready. She stepped forward as if to teach him a lesson. Harry felt something was wrong. Look at Crumb, he shouted. They turned and saw Crumb swaying as he struggled to stand. Fleur stared in disbelief. Crumb suddenly swung his wand. An Expelliarmus struck Fleur, sending her wand flying. Cedric and Harry reacted at once. Cedric with Expelliarmus, Harry with a stunning spell, knocking Crumb away. Fleur, are you all right? Cedric asked. She clutched her ankle, anger flashing through her expression. I can't continue. I have to withdraw. She could have used a healing charm, but having accepted help from the others, she felt she could not continue competing. Cedric picked up her wand and handed it back to her. He knew Fleur enough to know she would refuse assistance. What happened with Crumb? Harry asked, baffled. Fleur shot red sparks of temper into the air. Maybe Karkaroff made him do it, she snapped. You don't need to worry about me. I'll keep an eye on Crumb. If she had been less careless, Crumb wouldn't have disarmed her. Cedric and Harry exchanged a look. Both saw the determination in the other's eyes. Without a word, they split up and took different paths. Outside the maze, the professors stood ready to receive the champions as they emerged. Moody leaned on his cane watching everything, the red sparks from Fleur's ire still flaring in his periphery. Heinrich, breathing hard, stepped out of the shadows. You're not Moody, he blurted. Moody turned, a small smile playing on his face. Seems you found out. You should have noticed sooner. Heinrich's face hardened. Earlier, he had slipped into Moody's office and rummaged through a trunk. Inside, behind a false panel, he'd found a cabinet with Edgar's family crest stamped on it, a vanishing cabinet. He knew what such a cabinet could do, link to another cabinet and provide secret transport. How did Edgar's cabinet end up with you? Heinrich demanded, wand already raised. He was barely containing his suspicion. Moody sighed. What an unpleasant child, always been like that. He tapped his wooden leg with the tip of his cane and, without flinching at Heinrich's pointed wand, added, You know Hogwarts is protected against apparition, but there are ways around it. Heinrich cut him off. Petrificus totalis, he shouted, determined not to waste words. Moody smiled and stomped his wooden leg. The leg dug into the ground and pivoted. A vortex tore open beneath Heinrich's feet and began to pull him in. Heinrich's spell missed. His face changed as momentum took him. Portkey, someone, Moody said, and the man was gone. Meanwhile, Harry had solved the Sphinx's riddle and reached the Goblet of Fire. A grin of triumph threatened to break out when Cedric stepped out of a different passage. They both lunged for the goblet at the same time and touched it almost together. For a stunned moment, they just stared at each other, unsure what would decide the winner. Then, the table under the goblet exploded. They were too slow to dodge and were sucked into a vortex like being flushed down a drain. Just before he was pulled in, Cedric had forcefully tapped his constellation badge. Faces in the Constellation Society shifted. Somewhere, Daphne rose. Something's happened, she said. Harry's legs hit the ground hard. He nearly fell. He and Cedric still clung to the goblet. They looked around. The place felt like a graveyard. Cedric's voice was low. That table was a portkey, a single-use one. What do we do now? Harry asked, bewildered. Before Cedric could answer, Harry said sharply, Someone's coming. Cedric drew his wand and quietly tapped his constellation badge, whispering a quick charm. A tall, thin figure emerged, carrying something in his hands. A venomous voice drifted across the barren space. Get rid of the obstacles. A blinding green light slammed into Harry's vision. Avada Kedavra! Harry froze. For a second, he just watched as the beam struck Cedric. Two other voices sounded from different directions at once. Petrificus Totalis and Stupefy. And spells flew through the graveyard. Chapter 247, Resurrection and a Swift Horse. Under Harry's stare, Cedric, who should have been dead, was inexplicably unharmed. The figure that had been pierced dissolved into mist, a mirage. Some enchantment tied to the first task had saved Cedric's life. Harry, be careful. Cedric's voice was grave as he looked at the man who had easily deflected 2 spells. Interesting little magic. The man chuckled softly and looked off in another direction. I didn't expect you to chase me. You shouldn't be so irrational. From the shadows stepped Heinrich, wand gripped tight. You're behind all of this, he said coldly. Ardolfo Edgar, the man replied. Heinrich stared. Ardolfo smiled faintly, neatly groomed black hair, handsome features, the sort of look that belonged to a noble who might lounge in a wine cellar sipping something expensive. Time had left little trace on his face, except for a hideous burn scar at the corner of one eyebrow. My dear little Edgar, Ardolfo said, amusement in his voice. You don't even call me uncle anymore? It seems you took the gift I left for the lucky one. You should be dead. That great fire, many Death Eaters burned, Heinrich snapped. Ardolfo shrugged. Your father was sharper than you. He never believed I would so readily throw my life away. His eyes flashed at the mention of Heinrich's younger brother. He still keeps my wine cellar. My favorite bottles, he hasn't touched a single one. As for the Great Fire, it was real, and the Death Eaters who died were real, he continued. Unbothered that he still had the Dark Lord himself in his hold, Ardolfo's voice turned cold and hard as icicles. I told those spineless cowards we would occupy this place as a condition of negotiating with the Ministry. They actually believed me. When the Ministry moved on Roggy Village, they came begging for mercy. I dragged them all into the abyss with a great blaze. He laughed then, an ugly, satisfied sound. Ardolfo Edgar carried the same obsession and madness as his forebear. He was an elegant lunatic, painting a storm-racked hell with the stroke of a brush. Harry listened and felt certain he was dealing with a madman. How did you tamper with the maze? Harry demanded. The professors had checked it. This shouldn't have been possible. Ardolfo regarded Harry with a small spark of interest. It's simple, a little magic. As he spoke, his features writhed. The handsome face shifted into Moody's, then shifted again into an exact likeness of Harry's face. Harry's stomach dropped. Realization hit him hard. You put my name into the Goblet of Fire. This ability is quite interesting, isn't it? Ardolfo, wearing Harry's face, raised an eyebrow. A voice, impatient and thin, came from where the Dark Lord was being held. Ardolfo, hurry and complete the task. Of course, my master. Ardolfo smiled and let his wand hang loose. Those nearby finally noticed what Ardolfo was holding. Harry's scar flared with a fresh, stabbing pain. Heinrich said through clenched teeth, It's useless. I've already contacted the others. The Ministry will be here soon. Not soon enough, Ardolfo said lazily. There's enough time. His dark golden eyes swept over them, like a predator sizing prey. Then he moved. Even while holding Voldemort, his strength and speed were terrifying. He melted into a puff of black smoke and surged forward. A banishing charm struck before Harry could react, sending him flying. Cedric, startled, reacted quickly. He'd fought John earlier, and shouted, Expelliarmus! Ardolfo simply deflected it. As he prepared to strike again, a spell came from behind. Ardolfo blinked and burst 20 feet away with a bang. He flicked his wand and Heinrich was lifted off the ground, caught in a levitation charm. As soon as Heinrich rose, he countered with a shield charm. Cedric transfigured a loose stone into a tripping block, but Ardolfo easily vaulted over it and flicked his wand. A tombstone statue swung its scythe, narrowly missing Cedric's head. Heinrich and Cedric exchanged a look and attacked together. Incendio, Heinrich cried. A puño, Cedric answered. Heinrich's wand sent flames leaping into a wall of fire. Cedric turned pebbles into flying bullets. Ardolfo swept a wrist and sent another tombstone hurtling up to block the projectiles, then dispelled the wall of flame as if it had been cobwebs. He pointed and struck Cedric with a cruciatus curse. Cedric collapsed, writhing in pain. A stunning spell followed, and Heinrich fell unconscious. Total defeat. These students were outmatched by the former right hand of the Dark Lord. Ardolfo raised his wand toward Harry, who was struggling to get up but bound by ropes. Cedric lay helpless, veins standing out on his face from the agony. Hurry up, the thin voice of Voldemort urged, more pressing now. A stone cauldron flew over and hovered. The pain in Harry's scar exploded, worse than ever. Ardolfo pointed beneath the cauldron and flames sprang up, making whatever was inside bubble and gurgle. He untied the bundle he was carrying. Harry finally got a glimpse of what was inside and recoiled. It was a grotesque thing, like some malformed, corpse-like creature, and the scar on Harry's forehead screamed in pain as if recognizing it. Ardolfo tossed the thing into the cauldron as casually as one might drop a dead fowl into a stew and began mumbling a ritual. Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son. Under Harry's feet the grave cracked, and a pinprick of dust rose and drifted into the cauldron. Red sparks spit up from the brew. Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master. Ardolfo bent his hand and with a single calm motion severed his own left ring finger, dropping it into the pot. The potion turned bright red. A harsh light pierced Harry's vision, and the bleeding in his own body stopped, as if frozen. Ardolfo's expression never changed. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. His sleeve ripped back, and his forearm was cut open. Blood flowed freely, spilling into Ardolfo's waiting hand. He poured it into the cauldron, and the liquid inside blazed dazzling white. Then Ardolfo rolled up his sleeve to reveal the mark Harry had seen at the World Cup, the strange brand that had haunted Harry's nightmares. The mark darkened and blackened, as if burning, and the commotion inside the cauldron reached its peak. A cloud of white steam washed over Harry, blurring his sight. From that vapor emerged a black figure, tall, thin, almost skeletal. Ardolfo picked up a robe he had ready and draped it over the new shape. He took 2 quick steps back, knelt on one knee, and looked up with fanatic devotion. "My master, you have finally returned." Harry saw the face clearly now, the hollow, pale countenance he had dreamed of those 3 dreadful years. Bloodshot eyes, a flattened, snake-like nose, thin slits where nostrils should be. He had no real nose. The identity could not be mistaken. Lord Voldemort stood before them. A rare smile spread across Voldemort's lips. "Ardolfo, my most loyal follower," he said. "I once thought you had abandoned me." Ardolfo chuckled. "Never. If my nephew hadn't gone to Hogwarts, we might have passed like ships in the night." Voldemort's approval gleamed in his cold face. "Let me see who else is loyal to me." Ardolfo inclined his head and signaled. Summons had already been sent. Voldemort's impatience grew as the waiting lengthened. To pass the time, he turned to evil pleasures, wordplay, and barbs. He leaned forward, and his voice cut through the air as if it were a blade. "Harry Potter, you stand on the bones of my father," he hissed on, venom creeping into each syllable. "He was a muggle and a fool, just like your mother." His words were meant to wound when a sudden sound interrupted him. Crack, something fractured. Voldemort looked toward the noise. A figure that had been slumped rose unsteadily to his feet. Voldemort's interest sharpened. "Another Edgar," he observed. "He's much like you." Heinrich pushed himself up, his head heavy. He gripped a blue gem in his left hand and with his right tore at a necklace he wore, wrenching it hard. He looked over at Cedric, who was slowly gathering himself, and shouted, "Cedric!" Cedric turned with difficulty, seeing Heinrich rip free the pendant. "Authority of supremacy!" Heinrich cried. A powerful magic rolled outward and engulfed the graveyard. A silver ring on Heinrich's right hand slid and clamped over his arm, and he thrust his wand forward. The 5 magical crystals he'd been carrying sang and poured their power frantically into his wand. Chapter 224, Fiendfire. Magic turned into fuel, amplified tenfold by the Philosopher's Stone. Crimson flames coalesced into a magnificent steed. The effort was immense. Blood ran from the corners of Heinrich's eyes, and the gold in them burned brighter against the firelight. The steed charged, dragging Fiendfire to force Lord Voldemort and Ardolfo apart. Cedric, bracing himself, used a severing charm to cut Harry's ropes, then rushed toward Heinrich, shouting, "Heinrich!" He seemed to know what Heinrich intended and wanted to stop him. Heinrich held his stance, gritting his teeth as he forced the words out. "I am not like him." Ardolfo's Fiendfire had hunted down his comrades. Heinrich's Fiendfire would save his friends. Memories flashed through his mind until they settled on a Constellation Society gathering. Golden goblets raised together, a warmth he had been chasing. Gripping his wand with both hands, Heinrich roared, "For eternal glory." The steed neighed. Flames burst from its 4 hooves and enveloped the 2 of them. Trapped within the Fiendfire, neither could break free. Voldemort's composure snapped. "Anti-apparition," he cried. Today, Heinrich Edgar would clear every obstacle in John Wick's path. The cavern and fairy crawled up from the bottom of the Black Lake, their withered hands clinging to the slick rocks, hollow eyes fixed on Tang Mi, their water-soaked rags trailing behind them. Tang Mi fought relentlessly. He had been an Auror once. Instinct guided his spells. He threw a blazing fire charm, setting the rocks aflame, but the Inferi came in such numbers they seemed endless. Fatigue crept in. The rat clutching the golden locket could not feel relief. Instead, panic slammed into him. His breath hitched, and his plump body collapsed back into a stone basin. "No, it's you! It's you!" The rat screamed and shifted back into human form, one hand missing a finger. It was Peter Pettigrew. Fear made it hard for him even to draw his wand. He fumbled and tried again and again. In his eyes, John had become a massive black mist that swallowed him. The memory snapped back to that dark, sunless dungeon where, under the silver mask, he had been forced to drink bottle after bottle of veritaserum. "Devil! Devil!" Peter wailed. His cries drew Tang Mi's attention. In the instant Tang Mi turned, an Inferius broke through and lunged. Just before it touched him, it was hurled backward. The man who had been lying on the ground finally found some strength. He staggered upright, face blank and numbed. "My lord!" Tang Mi cried, relief flooding his voice. John fought to regain control. The potion had left him slow and sluggish. He took a magical crystal from his satchel, shattered it, and the mist that clogged his mind cleared. Panic-steeled, he closed in on Peter Pettigrew, and with a flick, the fallen wand flew into his grasp. He picked up the golden locket and slipped it into his pocket under Pettigrew's terrified gaze. "Please," Pettigrew begged, sobbing. John looked at him with cold indifference. "When I get out, I'll settle this with you." He cast 3 spells in quick succession, Expelliarmus and Crucio to the body, Stupefy to the head. Peter Pettigrew went down immediately. Tang Mi struggled to hold the situation together as John looked out over the seething mass of Inferi. He gripped the Philosopher's Stone and 3 remaining magical crystals in his hand. Magic boiled through him, and a golden flame bloomed at his wand's tip. That single flame felt eternal, its light cutting the darkness. "Roar!" The flame expanded instantly and became a golden dragon. The dragon swept in a circle around the lake. Wherever it flew, Inferi turned to ash. "Dragon leads the way," John shouted, raising his wand high. The dragon, composed of the immortal goblet's flame, lit the water's surface like molten gold. Wings unfurled from John's back. He grabbed the unconscious Pettigrew, beat his wings, and rode the dragon while Tang Mi scrambled into a boat. Any Inferi surfacing behind them were consumed by flame. When they reached the shore, Tang Mi didn't wait. He pressed his bleeding wrist to the closed cave wall. The archway reappeared, and John hurled Pettigrew into Tang Mi's arms. The dragon contracted into a single point. The Philosopher's Stone burned in John's palm. He knew the magical crystals were almost spent. With his last reserve of power, he detonated the immortal flame. The blast shot into the Black Lake, setting all the Inferi within it alight. John stepped out of the archway just a heartbeat before the explosion. The door slammed shut. The cavern shook from the tremendous impact. John stumbled and nearly fell. Tang Mi grabbed him and steadied him. John shook his head to say he was fine. "Let's get out of here," he said. Seeing Peter Pettigrew in Tang Mi's arms, unease rose in him like ice. He smelled conspiracy. They left the rock wall. John's badge glowed, his expression shifted. He tapped it, and an emergency ghostly interface popped up. He asked urgently, "What's happening?" Daphne's voice came through. "It's Cedric." Fleur answered in a rush. "He was attacked in the maze. Crumb, Cedric and Harry Potter are having their final duel." Percy added, "I've already asked Mr. Crouch to suspend the match. They're discussing it." Putting the pieces together, John realized something had gone wrong in the maze. He held the badge in his palm. In the badge's projection, 5 stars clustered in one direction, Hogwarts. 2 others were off in different places. "My lord?" Tang Mi clutched Pettigrew as John narrowed his eyes. "Call every security team near the cavern." Tang Mi tilted his head back and let out a long, wolf-like howl. 7 or 8 distant responses echoed back. John traced the direction of the 2 distant stars, his magic gathering enough for apparition. Then he stopped. He felt it. Apparition was blocked in that place. Someone was using the authority of supremacy he had once granted. Damn it. He dispersed a pattern of guiding magic so Tang Mi could follow the route. Then Nwamur apparated himself to the area. The security guards, alerted, followed by apparating after him. "Mr. Crouch, we need to suspend the match immediately." Percy shouted beside old Barty. The older man was bewildered at first. When Percy hissed, "Something's wrong in the maze," old Barty could not stand still. He rose and went to consult Ludo Bagman, insisting the match be suspended. Ludo hesitated. This was not his decision alone. Old Barty glanced at Percy again, and Percy met his look with grim seriousness. Trusting the young man's certainty, old Barty moved to summon the three judges. Amelia Bones frowned as she watched him hasten to the panel. Daphne had just finished contacting John. Anxiety showed on her face. Malfoy paced, unable to sit still. "Let's go in," he urged. "No, that would be blocked," Daphne interrupted him. "Where did Heinrich go?" Neville asked. "He just left," Daphne said. Fleur ran up to the stands. At old Barty's words, Dumbledore called the patrolling professors over for questioning. Professor Flitwick found nothing amiss, but Professor McGonagall noticed Moody was gone. Hagrid came running back, breathless. "The Goblet of Fire is gone. Someone took it." If the goblet had been taken, a champion had been chosen, yet no one had emerged from the maze. Panic spread through the crowd. Something was terribly wrong. Dumbledore ended the tournament at once. They needed to get into the maze and search. They combed the winding paths until they found something, Moody's prosthetic leg. Dumbledore examined it carefully and said, gravely, "A portkey." Elsewhere, in a fog-wrapped graveyard, a different kind of chaos was building. The Crimson Steed towered over the scene, growing ever larger. The Fiendfire was increasingly wild, almost impossible to control. Cedric yelled, "Heinrich, you'll get a backlash if you keep that up." "Get away from him, Cedric." Heinrich rasped, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. His eyes never left the two people trapped and struggling to escape. His wand began to glow with heat. Harry, newly freed, ran toward them and was horrified by what he saw. Beside the steed, a giant serpent of living flame rose up and lunged, its jaws closing inches from the beast's neck. Heinrich heaved and vomited blood. "Go now!" he croaked. Cedric grabbed his wand and roared, "I won't abandon my friend." Harry held his wand tight. The fire snake was monstrously unnatural. Heinrich pushed more magic through his body, and the steed kicked at the serpent. The ground ahead suddenly collapsed, and a tall figure climbed out, face hard as stone. At the sight of him, something like a scream touched the inside of Harry's head, his mother's wail. Lord Voldemort raised his wand. A flash of green light shot out. "Avada Kedavra!" Voldemort hissed. "Expelliarmus!" Harry cried. Green and red collided. Harry had never met such raw, concentrated power. At the point of impact, the light surged back toward him, forcing him back. Cedric leapt in to help. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted. Voldemort flicked the hand that wasn't holding his wand, and the spell crumbled. Cedric was thrown back, hard. The Dark Lord faced the boy who lived, two wills at war. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, crimson eyes fixed on him, "do you see the house on the hillside? My father lived there." He advanced without haste, each step pushing the green light along with him. "My mother was a witch who lived in that village. She fell in love with a muggle. When she revealed her nature, he abandoned her. My father would not have magic. He left her and returned to his muggle parents. I was not yet born." He spoke to Harry as if offering family history. "When my mother gave birth, she died. I grew up in a muggle orphanage and swore I would find him. I found him, and I had my revenge on the man who gave me my name, Tom Riddle." The green light crept closer to Harry's wand. He barely registered the words when Voldemort's voice tightened with fury. "Shut up," he snarled. Harry stumbled backward, fighting not to fall. Cedric forced himself up again, irritating Voldemort. "Like an irritating insect," the Dark Lord said, and though his free hand carried no wand, Cedric felt invisible fingers close around his throat. He floated, choking, and struggled. "Where are my Death Eaters?" Voldemort demanded, impatient. "Why have they not answered?" "Harry Potter," he went on, voice taking on a cold, haunted quality, "I remember what it was to be as powerless as a weak beast, unable to close my eyes, forcing myself to go on, second by second." He laughed, a sound that had no warmth. "Waiting in that forest for 13 years, I waited for the loyal. 4 years ago I nearly returned. Nearly, but his expression turned to hatred as he spat a name with utter disgust. John Wick, a clever man. He deceived me with the trappings of magic, and after I trusted him, he struck me down. I failed, so very close to the Philosopher's Stone. I went back to that hidden forest and found a new companion, Nagini. At the mention of Nagini, his face glazed for a moment, then flared with renewed rage. John Wick, he stole Nagini from me, he seethed. He took the venom I needed. The fragile body I had left barely survived in that forest until Wormtail found me and took me to Ardolfo. Unable to seize immortality, I settled for regaining my full strength. But his eyes seemed to glow blood red. My faithful Death Eaters are imprisoned. I know someone wants to take my power from me. I wanted to wait, but I could not. I had Wormtail fetch my things. Wormtail will lead that traitor to me. Once I am whole again, I will kill him, just as I am killing you now, Harry Potter. He smiled, cruel. Your mother used an ancient magic to protect you, and that magic brought her agonies. Now I am unbound by that magic. I will kill you. The fiendfire writhed, the fire snake coiled while the steed stomped. The struggle of living flame was coming to a head. Harry felt that he might not live to see the outcome. The green light was less than a foot from his face. The Death Eaters had not come. Voldemort's temper snapped. He meant to finish Harry then and there, and after that he would hunt down traitors and slaughter them all. Suddenly, Cedric, ignored and gasping for air, burst out, "Expelliarmus!" With what strength he had left, Cedric aimed for Voldemort. The red flash grazed the Dark Lord and interrupted his lethal focus for a fraction of a second. Cedric collapsed. Voldemort's wand trembled but did not fly from his hand. Cedric's spell was utterly inadequate against the Dark Lord, but that single insignificant interruption was enough. As green and red clashed, a golden light rose between them. A thin golden thread seemed to link the ends of their wands. Both wands trembled violently. Both men were lifted off their feet as if by a sudden pull. Then the golden thread snapped, and thousands of arcs of light burst into the air, weaving themselves into a dome-shaped shimmering net. Cedric tried to help Harry, but could not pass through the golden barrier. Inside it, a song like the music of heaven rang out, the cry of a phoenix. The sound filled Harry's heart, and a voice whispered to him not to let go of the connection. A ball of light hovered in the roiling tangle of red and green, shifting with the tug-of-war between them. Harry's anger swelled, and he shoved with all his will. The ball hurtled toward Voldemort's wand and struck it with a keening shriek. The Dark Lord's eyes widened in surprise. One by one, the lives Voldemort had snuffed rose out of his wand as glowing images. They flowed to Harry, standing beside him and begging him not to release his hold. Harry saw a couple, familiar faces, his parents. In the hollow of the light, a whisper sounded, "Little Edgar." The fire snake uncoiled and opened a path. Through it, Ardolfo stepped out, hair singed, face streaked with ash. He controlled the fiendfire with one hand, clutching his chest with the other. "Why do we have to fight like this?" he called. "You can join us completely. We are family." "Edgar's fate is to live in darkness, isn't it?" Ardolfo tried to soothe his nephew, coaxing him toward the Death Eaters. Heinrich did not back down. The gold in his eyes burned brighter. "You're wrong," he said. "That's your destiny." Heinrich took another step forward. The steed's hooves crashed through the fire serpent's body. Blood spattered his chest. He was feeding his life into controlling the fiendfire. "Edgar's light has never been extinguished," he spat. "You're the one who abandoned it." He took another stride, and something on his gauntlet, some magic crystal, shattered in a burst of sparks. Heinrich advanced without flinching, sneering, "When you lit that fire to flee, you made yourself unworthy of the Edgar name." Ardolfo stumbled back a step, shocked. The old wounds along his body flared. His control slipped as his magic was drained. When he first infiltrated the Constellation Society, he'd fallen into a trap. He'd managed to suppress the pain, but now, as his reserves were eaten away, the old injury flared. He should have been in control, yet he felt a hidden weakness he had not expected. Heinrich, by contrast, stood fearless. "You want to kill me?" Ardolfo demanded, staring at Heinrich. Heinrich's face so closely resembled his brother's that for a moment Ardolfo was dazed, unsteady, with the memory it stirred. Chapter 226, "I have found that light, and I cannot let anyone else destroy it." Heinrich's magic crystal shattered again, and the fiendfire steed went wild, its heavy hoof slamming down toward the fire snake's head. Ardolfo laughed, a brittle sound. "You're mad. You'll die for this." He seemed sure Heinrich wouldn't follow through, just like before, burning Death Eaters to hide better. Heinrich's expression, however, was terrifyingly calm. Yes, he said, I will die along with you. Ardolfo's face registered confusion. Is that child really worth your devotion? He's just a boy. Heinrich's sickly pale face split into a luminous smile that Edgar's men had never seen. John Wick will become famous throughout the magical world. His light will not stay in Hogwarts or in those filthy places. It will shine across the whole world. Edgar will be illuminated too. A third crystal exploded. Only two dim crystals clung to whatever control remained. Fiendfire had gone completely out of control. The fire snake was swallowed by the steed, and the conflagration grew even more ferocious. Cedric tried to rush in, but the flames held him back. Heinrich, he shouted, since it was impossible to extinguish Fiendfire with an ordinary summoning charm. Only someone of Dumbledore's power might intervene. Heinrich's lips curved into a smile. Let us welcome that light together. Ardolfo shook his head with a bitter chuckle, then said hoarsely, I never thought I'd be killed by my own nephew. For your king, for my master, let us die together. 2 generations, Edgar's lieutenant and Voldemort's lieutenant, refused to retreat even inside the Fiendfire. Ardolfo's power had been formidable. His magic was at level 6. If he hadn't been struck earlier while luring John away, he wouldn't have been trapped. One misstep had led to this. He had thought he could control the situation, but he had underestimated human nature. The steed's hoof came down on Ardolfo's body. He began to burn, accepting death with a strange calm. Fiendfire no longer answered Heinrich's commands, and Heinrich no longer had the strength to force it. He coughed blood, his face turned even whiter. The silver hand talisman contracted into a ring. Heinrich slipped it off and held it in his right hand, putting his wand down with his left. He removed the constellation badge and held it carefully, trying to face death with composure. As death neared, an image flashed into his mind, annoying, maddening, but always dazzling, golden light. Heinrich, when we graduate, I'll come find you. The blond boy had said with a grin that day by the sea, Your eyes are beautiful, like the sunset over the ocean. We can go to all the bright places. Wherever they are, I'll take you there. Annoyed but unable to deny the memory, Heinrich stood by the sea with that other boy and heard those words again in his mind. Were Edgar's promises the same golden light as the sun? Flames licked his robes. Fiendfire seared him. Through smoke and heat, he seemed to hear that person's voice call, Heinrich! He looked up. His golden eyes found a figure forcing his way in, shouting something that the roaring fire cut off. He couldn't hear the words, but he smiled. I can't wait until graduation, he thought. With that thought, Heinrich was consumed by Fiendfire. Chapter 250. Plea and refusal. Thick smoke, death, life slipping away amid roars and despair. Harry could not hear properly. He was in the middle of a confrontation with Lord Voldemort. His parents' faces urged him not to let go of the struggle. So he really is a wizard? An old man faded into view from the direction of Voldemort's wand. This fellow took my life. Fight him, child. Another voice, his mother, cried out when she saw Harry. Don't let go, Harry. Don't let him harm you. Hold on. Once the connection breaks, we can only stay for a little while, his mother added. We'll buy you time. You must leave quickly. No, I can't. Harry floated, unable to apparate. He didn't know the charm, and the portkey was single use. If the connection broke, his only likely fate was death. But then his mother said, Dumbledore is here, Harry. Those words steadied him. He chose to believe her. With force, he flicked his wand, and the mental connection snapped. The images didn't vanish. They flung themselves back toward Voldemort. Harry's next moment was not of falling alone, but of colliding into an embrace. Dumbledore really had arrived. A flicker of apprehension crossed Voldemort's face. Where were his Death Eaters? Ardolfo Edgar was dead, and even Voldemort felt the balance shift. The authority of supremacy's effect had vanished, and Voldemort's wand shone green. Avada Kedavra launched toward Dumbledore like thunder. A melody drifted across the battlefield. The green light struck a phoenix that appeared just in time. The spell was swallowed. The phoenix disintegrated into ash, and from those ashes a fledgling crawled out ugly and alive. The phoenix rose again. Voldemort realized someone else had arrived. The mysterious menace that had hung about him from the beginning was gone, replaced by blazing confrontation now that Dumbledore stood before him. Out of the sky another figure descended. Killing intent erupted from him. Reducto, White light blasted Voldemort's original landing spot. Immense force and a nearby tombstone shattered into dust. Lord Voldemort. John had arrived, and he was reckless with power. Charms poured from him as if he possessed an endless supply. He clenched his right hand. The silver-veined sword manifested, its blade wreathed in flame. Wings unfurled from his back. With a powerful beat, he swung the sword. A single swept arc carved a deep scorch across the earth and split the cemetery's tombstones. Voldemort shot John a long look, then apparated away. John didn't chase. He turned and rushed toward the fiendfire. There, another man wearing a silver mask, one of the silver hand, raised his wand, voice hoarse. Finite. Even Jin, most skilled in defense against the dark arts, could not quench this inferno. The golden light seemed insignificant before the snarling flames. When John reached the fire, he saw the figure burning within. His eyes went bloodshot, and his magic surged like a tidal wave. Dumbledore began to move, but John's power erupted first. Fiendfire itself seemed to be choked back by an invisible hand. With fierce, crimson determination, John raised his sword and slashed. The blaze parted before him like a sea split, creating a path. Magic rampage, Dumbledore murmured, watching as John charged into the heart of the fire. Someone else plunged in and dragged out a charred body. As the corpse was pulled free, the dead man's clenched fists relaxed. The silver ring and constellation badge tumbled free. The rescuer's knees nearly gave out, but he braced himself and mumbled, "This is a magical world. Use magic." The man who had taken off his mask, Jin Ledisley, stared with vacant, devastated eyes. Cedric knelt nearby and wept. John, however, didn't let himself collapse. He walked up to Dumbledore and, breathless and pleading, said, "Professor Dumbledore, the Time Turner, we can use it." He looked at Dumbledore with raw hope, voice stripped of its usual disguise. "I know you have it. Give it to me. Let me bring him back." Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. He could not bear the sight of John defying death, yet he understood more profoundly than most that a time turner could not undo outcomes that had been finalized. He shook his head. "I'm sorry, I cannot give it to you." Chapter 227. John, who had begun the conversation hopeful, even ingratiating, gradually dimmed. Under Dumbledore's steady gaze, a dark churning stain of magic blood rose and spread across his body, and a low voice came from behind the mask. "Professor Dumbledore, give me the time turner. It should have been mine." The voice was icy, nothing like the tone he'd used before, suffocating in its coldness. Dumbledore could see how dangerous the boy had become, but his face remained calm. "Time is a taboo, child." "Taboo?" John laughed once, low and ugly, then snapped his head up. In his eyes were equal parts hatred and fury. "Dumbledore, you're hypocritical as ever. You had a chance to save him a moment ago, but you chose Harry. You chose him, all of it, because of his family, because he's from Hogwarts, because he's Harry Potter." The accusation landed like acid. John had long known about favoritism, but he hadn't expected it to translate into a life denied. When Heinrich had been trapped by fiendfire and Harry had faced Voldemort, Dumbledore had unhesitatingly favored Harry. If Dumbledore had acted differently, Heinrich might have lived. He hadn't. Dumbledore had cared more for Harry Potter. John only wanted his friend saved. He steadied the sword he held on Dumbledore and said flatly, "Give it to me." He knew Dumbledore's habits and the staff's secrets, Mundungus's continued dealings, the fact that 2 third-year time turners had been approved and that one of them sat in Dumbledore's desk. He knew Dumbledore distrusted him, favored Harry. But he was also a Hogwarts student. All he wanted was fairness. He was even willing to sacrifice future fairness to save Heinrich. "Give it to me," he repeated. "I'm sorry." Dumbledore set Harry down gently and looked at John with genuine sorrow. "I can't." Harry could feel his heart pounding. He couldn't interrupt. Facing the greatest wizard of the century, John stood on the knife edge of collapse. "I cannot watch you become irredeemable," Dumbledore said, pleading in a way that tried to reach the boy. "Never tamper with taboos. Death is irreversible. A time turner cannot do what you ask." John had expected that he might expose himself by demanding the time turner, but he didn't care anymore. He laughed, cold and humorless, and turned to leave. Tampering with time. Who really broke taboos here? Who cloaked arrogance in the cloak of fairness? "You've exhausted my last shred of goodwill, Dumbledore." He paused for a heartbeat, the face under the mask unreadable. You may think yourself righteous, but even in a quagmire, there are things that kill. A steady volley of bangs answered. Security had arrived. Tangmi strode in, dragging Peter Pettigrew, and fell into silence behind John. The new arrivals filled the room. The air felt heavy, charged. Later, in the scorched remains where the fiendfire had eaten the life out of things, silence was the loudest sound. Fiendfire still threw long, black shadows over the ground. John stood before a dried, still form and felt the world narrow to a single, unbearable point. His hands trembled. Heinrich's face was no longer the face he remembered. Tears, snot. Cedric's grief had turned his features into a wreck. I didn't save him. It's my fault. Cedric choked. He blamed himself for bringing Heinrich here, for Heinrich choosing to die with Ardolfo. If he hadn't entered the Triwizard Tournament, none of this might have happened. It's not your fault, Cedric, John whispered, closing his eyes to gather himself. Everything else reduced to one truth. They had to go back. Back to the Constellation Society. Back to what they had shared. He concentrated on not losing his mind. Heinrich Edgar, his friend, his deputy, was dead, consumed in protective fire that had become a tomb. John hated himself for arriving too late. If he had come sooner, maybe none of this would have happened. He slid a trembling hand into his pocket and touched the golden locket he had nearly risked his life for. There was no comfort in it. If a Horcrux demanded sacrifice, he wished he had never opened that door. 4 years at Hogwarts, the arrogance of his other life, being Johnny Silverhand, the one who once commanded resources and confidence, had made him think he could face Voldemort on equal terms. Reality had struck hard. He had been the would-be king of Nocturne Alley, of Slytherin. Now all that remained was desolation. No treasure comes free. The fundamental law of alchemy whispered in his head. To obtain, one must lose. Gin Letisley came forward without a word and lifted Heinrich with a careful nod to John. Only Dumbledore and Gin had come from Hogwarts to the maze. Moody's wooden leg had been used as a portkey, set to a one-time, one-way transfer, and someone had phased through the vanishing cabinet instead. Heinrich had left a note on the wooden leg and run ahead through that cabinet. Gin recognized his handwriting at a glance and followed through Moody's office, arriving only slightly before Dumbledore. Both had witnessed Heinrich ringed by fiendfire and had been helpless to quench it. Dumbledore had apparated with his phoenix after checking the portkey's landing, and then John had arrived. John picked up Heinrich's badge and the ring. His fingers shook as he slid the ring onto his hand. Tangmi said nothing. He didn't need to. The security team stood silent too, all of them feeling the suffocating pressure radiating from John. This surge was different, the first spontaneous outbreak of his magic blood, not caused by any potion or deliberate feeding. The intoxicating certainty that he could do anything was there, but it brought no joy. He could not unmake a life already gone. They were about to leave when someone called, voice cutting through the heavy air. Peter Pettigrew? More bangs. Apparition after apparition, and among the arrivals Harry spotted Pettigrew, the traitor who'd betrayed Harry's parents, the man whose treachery had condemned Sirius to so much. Harry felt hot hatred flare up at the sight of him. He'd read the reports. Pettigrew had escaped from prison. He'd seen Sirius's fury in the newspapers. Harry wanted to shout a warning to Dumbledore and rush forward, but he stayed where he was, the chaos of the moment still settling around them. Professor Dumbledore saw it too, and he stopped Harry. Mr. Silverhand, could you hand this person over to me for safekeeping? Seeing Lord Voldemort with his own eyes, Dumbledore knew he had to make arrangements. There was no testimony more convincing to the public than Peter Pettigrew's. Only by mobilizing the entire wizarding world could they hope to defeat Voldemort. Even with the Elder Wand, Dumbledore could not hope to defeat Voldemort outright. He was old, and time was the most inexorable force. He spoke now, hoping John would leave Pettigrew alive, and worried that in his rage, John might do something irreversible. John stopped and looked back at Dumbledore. There had been a time when he had revered that old man. Now he had completely given up on him. Dumbledore, John said coldly, I'll settle our score myself. He gave Dumbledore no courtesy and no deference. There was no room for the so-called greater good. Tangmi's eyes widened at the declaration. This was Dumbledore. Tangmi, who knew John's true identity, understood what it meant. a student confronting his headmaster to settle a personal grievance. I don't need your help anymore, and you shouldn't expect anything from me. Under Dumbledore's calm gaze, John apparated away. The others apparated one by one as well. Left behind were only Harry and Dumbledore, and the fiendfire that had lost its magical suppression. Even if he couldn't beat Dumbledore, John wanted to leave him with something unpleasant to clean up. Harry returned, brought back by Dumbledore. Only he returned. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but Harry was still reeling from what he'd seen. Dumbledore immediately ordered a search of the castle. Old Barty brought Aurors, and they found Moody wandering in the Forbidden Forest, dazed and hit by a Confundus charm. When Moody came to, he knew what had happened. He'd been under the influence of a Confundus for a time, sometimes even compelled to teach in Ardolfo's stead. Because of the charm, his lessons had been erratic. In his own words, they had been a mess. Sirius arrived for the final match, looking haggard. His godson had been in grave danger right under his nose. He was frantic about whether Harry had been hurt. Cedric returned as well. His parents watched their stunned son, his mother beginning to cry. "Sorry, I need to talk to my friends," Cedric said, forcing a smile. Under worried looks, he found his friends from their Constellation Society and asked, "What on earth happened?" Malfoy was agitated, desperate for answers. Cedric's throat felt tight, as if a stone blocked it. Neville offered, "It must have been Professor Dumbledore who saved you, right?" Daphne and Fleur looked at Cedric too, anxious for the truth. "Heinrich is dead," Cedric said finally. After that, he couldn't go on. He left in a daze. That day, he couldn't bring himself to say anything more. In the hospital wing, old Barty visited the two champions. Cedric remained silent the whole time. He barely spoke. It wasn't until everyone else had left that Harry, from the bed beside him, murmured, "Do you know him? Johnny Silverhand?" Harry couldn't shake the image of that gaze. It had felt as if it could swallow a person whole. Ardolfo, Voldemort, Johnny Silverhand. The things he had witnessed that day would stay with him forever. Cedric was quiet a moment, then asked suddenly, "Harry, why did Dumbledore choose to save you first?" Harry was surprised. He'd never thought about it. Confronted with the question, he stumbled for an answer. Should he say he looked more dangerous? And yet Heinrich's body had already been burning with fiendfire. Maybe. "Dumbledore saw I couldn't hold on any longer," Harry said, his voice thin. Cedric didn't reply. He simply lay there. "Don't say anything about Heinrich," he murmured at last. "You don't need to say anything." The conversation ended because both boys knew that talking more would change nothing. Nothing could bring Heinrich back, and nothing would prove Dumbledore biased. Harry felt guilty. He knew he shouldn't be so upset. Compared to life itself, his pain was trivial. Heinrich had saved him, and Harry had been powerless. For the first time, Harry felt uncertain about his view of Slytherin. He had always thought Slytherin full of self-serving people. As Ron had said, many had become Death Eaters. Heinrich wasn't a Slytherin by house, but he had Slytherin qualities, and Harry realized he might have been too quick to judge the whole house. Chapter 252, John Wick and Dumbledore. Dumbledore's office was quiet. The door opened without a hand to it. Silver instruments gave off puffs of smoke, and the sorting hat lay as if asleep. Fawkes, reborn from the ashes, looked up and saw no one. A drawer by the desk stood open. A second before the time turner could be taken, a voice spoke. "John." The old voice carried the weight of inevitability. Dumbledore had returned. He had come from the hospital wing, fatigue visible behind his half-moon spectacles. "John, you cannot do this," he said with a sigh. "Death cannot be reversed. Even if you take the time turner, you cannot change that." The hand at the desk froze, then a figure stepped forward from the shadows. This time, John had no mask. He looked at Dumbledore calmly. "You knew I was coming." "I did." Dumbledore entered fully and regarded him with a complicated expression. "Obsession will only lead you astray." John fell silent for a moment, his hand curled around his wand beneath his sleeve. "Let it go, John," Dumbledore said softly as he approached. "Every magic exacts a price." He hoped to turn John back from a dangerous path. As long as John didn't delve into forbidden arts, his soul could remain intact. But John laughed, a harsh sound that cut the quiet. "You once said I was the one who most resembled a Slytherin." He fixed Dumbledore's old face with a stare, and the laugh became bitter. Isn't that ridiculous? I once trusted you, John continued, voice shaking with scorn, hoping you would guide me, protect me. Dumbledore fell silent under the intensity of it. But you never trusted me, did you? The accusation was a shout. John's eyes were cold, as if he stared at a stranger. Mundungus, he's your man, isn't he? When did you begin to suspect that Johnny Silverhand was you? He demanded. The Hog's Head, Dumbledore said quietly, the lines around his eyes tightening. My brother runs the pub. So that's why. John put the pieces together. He understood now why Dumbledore had seemed suspicious of him after his 3rd year. A famous Johnny Silverhand showing up in Hogsmeade and meeting someone in secret. With Dumbledore's mind, the inference had been hardly surprising. Dumbledore, John said with mocking contempt, since you never trusted me, don't hide it behind that hypocritical concern. Whether you aim to create a savior or to manipulate others, I don't care, he went on, voice rising. But don't expect me to be like a dog, obeying your every command. John was merciless in a way he had never been before. Beneath his outward calm, the madness flared, and Dumbledore watched, weary and pained, as the abyss in John's eyes widened. Chapter 229, Dumbledore tried to explain. John, I never thought that. You did, John cut in, merciless. He peeled away the thin veil of pretense between them, forcing down his disgust. Don't lie to yourself, Dumbledore. You know exactly why you suppressed the Time Turner. You knew I was coerced by Quirrell in my 1st year, he went on, voice steady, and you wanted to test me. You should have trusted me, but you didn't. You watched me. You sent Mundungus. You saw my interest in dangerous magic, and you were afraid I would touch the forbidden, so you kept the Time Turner that should have been mine. You never trusted me. In your eyes, Slytherins cannot be trusted. You let Moody suppress Slytherin. Don't tell me you didn't know. You let it happen because what you wanted to see was me broken. You thought I would fail under your education, that I would become another example of ruin. You were afraid of me. Afraid I would become something worse. He tore the mask off Dumbledore's hypocrisy with a calm that made his words colder. Dumbledore. Dumbledore's eyes widened at the name. John continued, quieter now. Not everything is within your control, Albus, not even for you. Like Voldemort, like me. You tout your righteousness and your restraint, John said, but what did it produce? From now on, play savior on your own. I'm done participating. He was tired. He walked past the office's long table, looked at the man who had been flustered and pained, and added, I will not become the Dark Lord, nor will I become what you expect. Perhaps that day you will stand as you are now, wand in your hand, Dumbledore murmured, and something in him shuddered. The remark snapped Dumbledore to attention. He looked down at his hand and realized he had unconsciously gripped his wand. More terrifying still was the malice he found swelling toward his student. He released the wand and sighed. John, I am very sorry for what happened to you and for what happened to your friend. You don't need to apologize, John replied softly. You only taught me that this world is a game for the strong. He left the headmaster's office. Whether Dumbledore's actions had been cold calculation or misguided compassion no longer mattered. John felt a friend lost. As he passed the sword of Gryffindor, it trembled slightly, as if trying to hold him back. He glanced at the weapon that should have meant something to him. Envy was gone, replaced by a hard, icy detachment. He left without the Time Turner. He knew the conversation would not be repeated. Dumbledore would keep it to himself. The old man was clever, but he suffered from an excess of compassion. He believed people could be redeemed. Even Tom Riddle had once been someone he tried to save. In John's view, Dumbledore's compassion had allowed Voldemort to recruit talent and spread his ideology inside Hogwarts. The seeds of the Death Eaters had been sown there. But none of that changed the fact that he had lost trust. Midnight. Hogwarts was awake. Old Barty had not left the castle, nor had Amelia. They, along with others, waited in the hospital wing for answers about the Ministry and the fate of the wizarding world. John walked with heavy steps to the Constellation Society meeting room. He paused at the entrance and closed his eyes, picturing the members sitting within, waiting for news they feared to hear and would only accept if it came from him. He pushed the door open. 5 pairs of eyes turned to him at once: Daphne Greengrass, Fleur Delacour, Draco Malfoy, Neville Longbottom, and Percy Weasley. They waited in silence. John approached the table but did not sit. He placed on it a badge, its edges singed as if by fire. The room's silence cracked into a choke of sound. Malfoy's breath hitched, then he bit his lip until tears spilled from reddened eyes. Neville, too, could not keep it in. Daphne and Fleur blinked at one another with reddening eyes. Percy alone held himself steady, though his voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "John, we need to know everything." John nodded and began, calmly, with the facts as he knew them: the Horcrux cave and its dangers, the rituals, Peter Pettigrew's capture, Lord Voldemort's return to a body. He told them that Heinrich had died along with the Death Eaters, sacrificing himself to protect Cedric. More details would have to come from Cedric himself. Silence settled over them as the name landed. Lord Voldemort, the Dark Lord who had almost dominated the wizarding world, whose power rivaled Dumbledore's. A hollow helplessness settled in their chests. Then Malfoy's fist slammed the table. He roared, "We will have our revenge." Neville nodded. Daphne and Fleur flinched not at the shout, but at the resolve. Percy said slowly, "We must keep our heads. That man is—" "Heinrich is dead," Malfoy cut him off. "He died because of him. Lord Voldemort." There had been a time when Malfoy had admired that name under other influences, but now he saw the Dark Lord only as an enemy. A handful of students seeking vengeance on such a foe sounded absurd, but John's reply was steady. "We will have our revenge, once you are strong enough." He looked around at each of them. "Get stronger. Build up the power and resources we'll need to face them." That single command planted a seed: revenge. It would drive them from then on, pushing them to grow. Percy watched John closely. He knew more about John's identity than most, and he sensed the tidal wave that was about to sweep through the wizarding world. Chapter 253, Reactions and Funeral. The hospital wing brimmed with people. 2 ministry officials, the Weasley family, Hermione, Sirius Black, several professors, and the Diggories. They were there for their children, and also to feel the fragile relief that came with surviving disaster. Madame Pomfrey was perturbed. The crowd disturbed her patient's rest. Dumbledore arrived to give everyone the answer they had gathered for, an answer the whole world needed. "Lord Voldemort has regained a physical body," he said. An eerie silence fell. Old Barty and Amelia drew breath as if the air itself had changed. "Lord Voldemort has returned," Dumbledore repeated. "A student has died. We must take immediate measures. There is still a chance to salvage the situation." "The first and most urgent step is to remove the Dementors from Azkaban," he announced. Amelia's brow nodded. "You think the Dementors will turn against the Ministry?" These were not ordinary people. Old Barty and Amelia were seasoned, not prone to jumping at every alarm bell. They were no Cornelius Fudge. Unlike that man intoxicated by power and blind to common sense, they understood the gravity of what Dumbledore proposed. "Dementors are among Lord Voldemort's most dangerous allies," Dumbledore said. "Allowing them to guard prisoners who would give themselves over to him is like handing lambs to wolves. Their interests line up with his. They can and will be turned." Old Barty bristled. "We can't act without the Minister of Magic." His response shifted the tone of the discussion. He looked to Dumbledore with a mixture of expectation and impatience. Amelia, likewise, understood the political obstacle. Dumbledore, anticipating the pushback, moved on to his second proposal. "The second measure, and it must be done immediately, is to send envoys to the Giants." "Giants?" Old Barty's face soured. "We chased them off ourselves." "It's not too late to extend a hand," Dumbledore said. "If we don't, Lord Voldemort will. He has done it before." Those words silenced Barty. Voldemort could, and would, make offers others could not, granting Giants rights and freedom in exchange for their support. The thought of such bargaining chilled them all. Chapter 230. If the wizarding world found out that Hogwarts, or the Ministry, was establishing diplomatic relations and cooperation with the Giants, it would be humiliating. Wizards had always looked on Giants with contempt. After the Giants had been driven away, they were remembered as brutish, murderous, and dangerous. Even trolls seemed almost charming by comparison. That was why, if it ever got out that Hagrid was half giant, he might not be allowed to stay at Hogwarts. Fleur had Vila blood and suffered only the occasional snub from schoolgirls. Giants were another matter entirely. "I hope you will follow my counsel," Dumbledore said, addressing the visitors quietly but firmly. If we prepare the right measures now, the ministry and the whole wizarding world will remember what we did during this crisis." He made it sound possible, even attractive. He went on, "Lord Voldemort will summon his Death Eaters. They will attempt to assemble, just as Ardolfo Edgar did. They are not dead. They are hiding." "Ardolfo Edgar?" murmured a shocked voice. "That madman!" Amelia's smile vanished at the name. Ardolfo had been one of the more feared names during Voldemort's first rise. Amelia Bone's memory recoiled from it. Fortunately, Ardolfo was dead, burned by fiend fire, a fitting end for someone who had slaughtered so many in the Bones family. For a moment, she allowed herself a small, grim satisfaction. Then the smile faded. Voldemort had more monsters than one. There was Lestrange, still imprisoned in Azkaban. The room fell into a heavy silence. Visitors and professors alike felt the old, sickening familiarity of fear. Voldemort had returned. It was as if his first fall were only yesterday. Snape's evidence did nothing to lighten the mood. Less than an hour ago, his dark mark had burned hot and black. That was Voldemort calling his followers. They had heard Harry and Cedric's testimony. Hermione raised a hand. "Professor, why didn't the Death Eaters answer you-know-who's call?" Her question exposed a blind spot everyone had missed, especially Harry, who had watched Ardolfo use the dark mark. Even Voldemort had not expected no one to come. Dumbledore's eyes flickered. "I think this has something to do with Johnny Silverhand." Those words summoned a different set of memories for Harry, the silver mask and the shadow of conflict between Dumbledore and Johnny Silverhand. Dumbledore was guarded. The more he withheld, the more mysterious Johnny Silverhand became. Old Barty's eyes glittered with a pleased light. Dumbledore's reserve served Barty well. The less the world knew about Johnny Silverhand, the better for certain ambitions. Amelia was not pleased. From the king of Nocturne Alley to the so-called second king, Johnny Silverhand had been a constant thorn in the ministry's side. "Mr. Silverhand seems to be making a move," Barty said. "Do you think he's using this to expand his influence?" another voice asked. They read the situation differently, but neither would press for Dumbledore to publicly back anyone. Dumbledore had always refused to endorse candidates openly. Fudge had become minister with Dumbledore's quiet support, but Dumbledore would not make such endorsements now. Whether they should try to remove the Dementors or open contact with trolls and giants, nothing could be decided at the moment. Dumbledore knew that. He had other arrangements to make. Morning came. The first light spread over the lake. The members of the Constellation Society stood in grave silence. None of them were at class, not even Cedric. He had slipped out of the hospital wing to stand on the little island in the lake where the crystal coffin lay. The sunlight struck the water and the glass, filling everything with pale, trembling gold. In the crystal coffin, Heinrich's body had been restored to outward normalcy. John had used magic to make him look whole again, magic that left John drained and close to fainting. Bodies could be arranged. Life could not be restored. They watched their friend as if watching someone sleeping and waiting for him to wake. Malfoy was mute. Neville could not bring himself to look. Cedric clenched his fists. Percy stood still, lost in thought. Fleur set a sunflower on the coffin, bold and sunward. Daphne placed the half-burned wand into Heinrich's hand. In the hush, John held a handful of earth. "Death is very close to us," he said, voice flat and distant. The soil slipped through his fingers and fell. "Let us bid him farewell, my friend." With their hands, not with magic, they lowered the coffin into the earth. Their hands were rough, their faces disordered, but they buried Heinrich themselves. If he were only asleep, then this was how one buries sleep. Close, reverent, human. The crystal coffin had been used to preserve him. Whether that was stubbornness or hope, John could not say. He wanted to believe he could find a way to undo death. "Wait for me," he whispered. After, John went to Gin Ledisley. Gin's usual brightness was gone. His words came out hoarse. "Mr. Ledisley, why did he simply fall asleep?" "We had agreed." Gin trailed off, the agreement a jagged, empty thing now. He looked as if a piece had been torn away and nothing could fill the hollow. John took from his pocket Heinrich's constellation badge and held it out. Gin stared at it, then took it as if his hands did not know what to do with it. This was what he treasured most, he said, voice barely audible. He said there was a light hidden in it, the light he was chasing. He touched the badge as if testing the realness of it. A drop of rain fell on the surface. "Is it raining?" whispered. Another drop blurred his vision. Emotions pent up all night, smashed out with the rain. Nobody laughed at him. Everyone was as broken as he was. Night fell, the last night of term. The great hall was heavy with quiet grief. Heinrich Edgar was gone. Slytherin's side had seats empty where he should have sat. Neville was absent from Gryffindor. Some people just couldn't bear the feast. Dumbledore looked over them all, his own face somber. "Tonight I must say many things," he began, "but first I must sorrowfully announce that we have lost a very fine person. He should have been sitting here with us. He could have returned to his school, but he sacrificed himself to protect his friends. I ask everyone to stand and raise their glasses to Heinrich Edgar." Glasses were raised throughout the hall. Murmured tributes filled the air. John was not among them. He had left the school early. He was at Silverhand Manor. Tang Mi, who had come with him, kept so close she could tell by the set of his jaw how badly he was hurting. "My lord, please accept my condolences," she whispered. John held a book and a paper on the table. His face was blank and cold. "Words don't change anything. Let them mourn," he said. The paper lay outstretched. With his signature, it would become effective. A Death Eater bounty order. Chapter 254, Bounty and Hunt. A slovenly, overweight, bald man came home to his cramped, ramshackle flat. His taut, nervous face relaxed a little at the sight of his familiar squalor. He set his toolbox down, rifled through a cabinet, and found a bottle of tequila with only a mouthful left. He twisted off the cap and was about to take the last sip when there was a knock at the door. His nerves spiked. He snatched up the wand on the table. "Who is it?" he called, voice high and wary. Silence answered. He peered through the peephole. Outside it seemed utterly black. For a moment he thought night had fallen early. He squinted to see better, and then froze. It was not darkness. It was a black wand pointed straight at his eye. A tiny white light flared at the wand's tip, and the door exploded inward. The blast threw the man backward. His own wand skittered across the floor and shattered under a hard-soled boot. The newcomer filled the doorway, a figure in a black trench coat and a battered cowboy hat, 3 bloody fingers tied to his chest like a grotesque talisman. That distinctive outfit belonged to Fingerman Ox. A notorious dark wizard, he was notorious for severing fingers as trophies after killing his victims. 3 wizards had already fallen to him. The 4th trembled at his feet. "Please, please let me go," the man begged, collapsing to his knees, his back slick with cold sweat. Tears and snot ran down his face. "I'm not a Death Eater anymore, honestly." Oakser sneered. He drew the short knife from his waist, slid open the man's left sleeve, and exposed the dark mark. Then he pulled open his trench coat to reveal the same emblem on the lining, the silver hand, and a fanatical light came into his eyes. "You know what this means," he taunted. "You joined the Star Disciples?" the man wailed. Oakser laughed in a drunken, vicious way. The man had hoped pleading or handing over his savings might save him. He realized, with a cold flash of understanding, that the Star Disciples didn't care about money. They didn't bargain. They enjoyed killing. The man's face hardened. He decided he would fight to the last breath. He rose, preparing to strike, then felt a wand pressed to his forehead. Ookser's mocking gaze made his scalp prickle. "It's a pity you're not one of the elites on the list," Ookser said, pulling a parchment from his pocket. He scanned the names and read aloud, with theatrical cruelty. "Hope Cliff has caused magical harm to at least 3 muggles, resulting in at least 1 death. By the Constellation Court's judgment, the Star Disciples shall carry out the death sentence." Ookser's expression went cold and clinical. "Sleep well." Reducto. Hope Cliff's head exploded. Blood and brain matter spattered across the room. When the dust settled, Hope, already dead, left a grisly mess. Calmly, Ookser brushed material from his sleeve, peeled the dark mark from the dead hand, and cut off an index finger as a souvenir. He straightened his coat, walked out without looking back. The leaky cauldron, where Nocturne Alley dissolved into Diagon Alley, was the sort of place a man like Oakser could pass through unnoticed, if he wanted to. That evening, the pub was thick with smoke and steam under orange-red lamps. Drunkards slumped over the bar. Gossip moved like a current through the cramped tables. "Hope Cliff's dead," announced a red-nosed wizard with a pockmarked face, his voice still trembling with fear. You should have seen how he went. Cliff? I figured he was a plumber. Why would he be dead? A skinny wizard asked, astonished. Deaths like this weren't supposed to happen outside the times of Lord Voldemort. He was a Death Eater, the pockmarked wizard crowed. He enjoyed being the man with the news. The green-hatted man cursed. No wonder my pipes kept getting blocked. My wife asked him to come last time. Turns out he was behind it. The skinny wizard leaned forward, hungry for details. The pockmarked nose wizard took a long gulp of beer and lowered his voice. It wasn't the Aurors. He was visited by the Star Disciples. I live next door. I heard everything. If the Star Disciples show up, you're done for, said another nearby. If I were a Death Eater, I'd have died of fright by now. Across the room, Benson's face had gone white. The pockmarked nose wizard saw it and reached to steady him. At that moment, a man in a tailcoat was ushered inside by the Leaky Cauldron's owner and pinned a new notice to the blackboard of bounties near their table. The headline caught every eye, reporting a Death Eater, 200 galleons. Killing a Death Eater, 500 galleons. The room buzzed. Who'd pay that much? The green-hatted man muttered, suspicious. But when his gaze fell on the small silver hand stamped at the corner of the notice, his words died. The mark of the Star Disciples left no room for doubt. The pockmarked nose wizard grabbed Benson's sleeve and shouted, "Stay! Tell him what you know." The tail-coated man smiled with the practiced charm of someone used to getting information. "If you provide clues and assist, we'd be grateful," he said. Benson wrenched free and bolted for the door. The tail-coated man didn't move. Then in a blink, he was by the door. A red beam flashed from his wand. Benson's knees buckled and he hit the floor. The others sat frozen, the pockmarked nose wizard with his hand still outstretched. The tail-coated man walked back to the table, dropped 200 galleons onto the wood, and said lightly, "Thank you for your cooperation." Everyone stared at the two identical men now standing where the notice had been posted. Under their collars glinted a silver scythe. The skinny wizard's voice trembled. "They're the Star Disciples." The pockmarked-nosed wizard sank down onto a bench. Word of the Star Disciples' presence spread like wildfire. In town after town, even in remote places, the Star Disciples were hunting Death Eaters. Some surrendered out of terror. Azkaban seemed preferable to the Star Disciples' brand of vengeance. No one could agree where these people had come from. They were once terrifying dark wizards in their own right, and now they had a single-minded ruthlessness for hunting Voldemort's followers. Many Death Eaters who tried to summon them with their dark marks found themselves paying a terrible price. The mark might flare, but any who answered often never returned. When Death Eaters ignored summons, Lord Voldemort himself grew furious. He had made for McNair's house only to find the occupant gone, and in his place, strips of human skin peeled from dark marks laid out like a message. "Do you like the gift I gave you?" It was a humiliation Voldemort had never known. He burned the building with a single charm and apparated away, furious and stifled. The Star Disciples' hunt continued, and the Death Eaters were pinned back into hiding. At Silverhand Manor, Johnny Silverhand, sat stroking the head of a black, long-eared owl named Riddle while listening to the reports from the field. Tang Mi had come to tell him that Old Barty had arrived at the manor. Old Barty's visit was predictable. He was running for Minister of Magic and wanted support. Dumbledore and Johnny Silverhand were the two most influential figures in the wizarding world. Whoever aligned with them could tip the balance. Old Barty understood that. His power base in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement made him formidable. He'd gained credit for his handling of the Triwizard Tournament debacle and still enjoyed public favor, but he needed someone to break the stalemate with Amelia. He needed either Dumbledore or Johnny Silverhand. "Mr. Silverhand," Old Barty said when he was shown in. John, wearing his silver mask, continued to stroke the owl's head. "Old Barty, my friend," John rasped, "you showed fairness in the tournament. Everyone praises you. Tell me, what do you want?" "Mr. Silverhand." Old Barty softened his tone, choosing his words carefully. "I want your support." John had been waiting to hear that. He placed a book on the desk and let his ringed left hand rest on it. Old Barty's eyes flicked to the book, knowing whatever it was could be useful in the campaign. John's fingers paused as if weighing more than the object under them. "As a friend," John said in a low voice. "I hope you will consider your path very carefully." Old Barty frowned. "What do you mean?" The eyes behind the silver mask seemed to draw the room in. John named the one person Old Barty would immediately understand the gravity of: Albus Dumbledore. The name hit Old Barty like a physical blow. His face changed as if to confirm he'd heard it right. John continued, "Remember Cornelius Fudge? A mediocre man, elevated because of Dumbledore's compliment. He ran the ministry like it was Dumbledore's house, every decision bent under that shadow." Old Barty listened, uneasy. John's tone made clear. Alignments with the great and powerful were not neutral favors. They were political chains. If Old Barty wanted power without strings, he had to think harder than simply courting the most popular wizard in the world. Chapter 232, Old Barty muttered, "Dumbledore might be worried about the wizarding world." No, no, no. Johnny Silverhand rose and crossed the room, placing the book in Old Barty's palm. If Dumbledore cared about the wizarding world, he wouldn't have chosen Fudge. He cares about himself. He doesn't want to be minister, but he wants the minister to listen to him. The words were like a devil's whisper. They made Old Barty think of things he had tried to forget. Fudge's weak personality. Remember Lucius? Whatever happened to his complaint against Dumbledore? Old Barty's fingers closed around the book. Lucius's complaint had gotten him kicked off the school board. He had returned later with Johnny Silverhand's help, but the position had been hollowed out. The power that rightfully belonged to the Malfoy family had evaporated. "Dumbledore likes to restrain others with his self-righteousness," Johnny said, patting Old Barty's shoulder. "Look at all the dangerous things he's done over the years. Maybe he isn't fit to be headmaster." Old Barty heard himself agree before he'd meant to. Yes, he's dangerous. He startled at his own words. How could he think like that? He remembered the day he had deferred to Dumbledore on the appointment of a new minister. Dumbledore's prestige was so absolute that even Amelia had found nothing wrong with him making a casual decision about the minister's office. If one day Old Barty became minister, would he be brought down by a single word from Dumbledore? His face went grim. He had to admit Dumbledore's influence was overwhelming. "You're right," he said carefully to Johnny, "but Mr. Silverhand, I can't force Dumbledore to retire." The corner of the silver mask smiled. Johnny looked at the book meaningfully. "You're qualified now." Old Barty opened the book with skepticism, thinking it would be some tool to distance himself from Amelia. What he found inside shocked him. It wasn't merely leverage, it was a promotion. Death Eaters were trapped inside like photographs, frozen and powerless, each one a bargaining chip. "Don't release the news about Lord Voldemort yet," Johnny told him. "Wait until you're minister, then reorganize the ministry." Old Barty had already written to Johnny the moment he left the school. "Lord Voldemort has returned. Dumbledore has seen it with his own eyes." He trusted Dumbledore enough to believe that, unlike Fudge. "Mr. Silverhand, with respect," he said in a low voice, "even if I have differences with Dumbledore, now is not a good time." Johnny shook his head and sneered. "Old Barty, do you think this would help you? If you follow Dumbledore and announce Voldemort's return now, what will that do for Dumbledore's reputation?" Johnny continued. "People will remember the Dumbledore who once faced two Dark Lords. If you simply become his puppet, the public won't accept you." Old Barty's face darkened. He didn't want to be a puppet. Johnny's next words eased his fear about Voldemort. "Don't worry. Dumbledore is a self-styled champion of righteousness. Even if everyone abandons him, he will gather forces and fight Voldemort to the end. We only need to control the middle ground." Fine, be righteous, Johnny thought, and go tackle Voldemort. A flash of ruthlessness crossed his eyes. The implication was clear. Let Dumbledore and Voldemort expend each other, while the Ministry quietly rebuilt itself. The Ministry's status would rise when the two titans clashed. With Johnny Silverhand backing him, Old Barty, now second only to Dumbledore, would have support if things went wrong. Old Barty's eyes lit up. Compared to strengthening Dumbledore, this was the better plan. During the holidays, he would secure the Ministry. Johnny set people in motion. He had Rita write a flattering article about Old Barty and prepared a less flattering piece on Dumbledore. Nothing elaborate, just reminders that in his early years, Dumbledore had hired a Death Eater as a professor, later a werewolf, and allowed an unforgivable curse to be demonstrated in class. He brought Lockhart on board for promotion. Publicly, money and influence were deployed. Privately, Death Eaters were quietly neutralized. Officials at every level showed up at banquets. The Auror office lent discreet help. Although Amelia fought hard, she lost the initiative. Old Barty's reputation rose. A week later, Johnny began the next phase. Hogwarts mattered. Its monopoly on magical education made it the alma mater of the powerful. The headmaster's post was vital, not just to replace Dumbledore. Johnny thought of someone who had once been ideal for the role, but now was no longer suitable. He was also working on the Horcrux problem. He wanted to create a Horcrux tracker based on the links between Horcruxes to locate the others. The Golden Locket had returned some time ago, but Johnny had not studied it closely yet. Before he could, an unexpected visitor arrived, Severus Snape. Snape walked into Silverhand Manor with his usual unreadable expression. Johnny had been watching him from the windowsill. Snape had briefly been a candidate for headmaster in Johnny's thoughts, but he was, in Johnny's judgment, not someone destined to stand with him. The answer had been given in the third year. How interesting it would be if Snape knew that Johnny intended to move against Dumbledore. Johnny wasn't sure whether Dumbledore had told Snape about him. Snape was Dumbledore's most trusted man. In any case, Johnny decided to meet him, his former recruit, once refused, now the one seeking an audience. The role reversal was delicious. Snape was a master of disguise, trained as an undercover agent for Lord Voldemort, and an exceptionally gifted wizard. His occlumency was at least level 6. Even Voldemort could not penetrate his mind, making Snape the most promising of the 4 future leaders. He invented spells. John's own Incarcerus came from Snape, and he was a brilliant potion maker. In raw talent, only Dumbledore and Voldemort exceeded him. If he had had time, Snape might have become a pillar of the wizarding world. But Snape's time had been cut short. From the day Voldemort returned, Snape's life became a countdown. He was a pawn, instructed to lurk and gather information, awaiting Voldemort's summons. Snape had accepted this. After the death of the woman he loved, he had never been the same. It was Dumbledore who had kept him alive to protect eyes like lilies. Johnny Silverhand, Snape repeated silently. Dumbledore had already begun his preparations. Hagrid was sent to sway the giants, and other creatures of the Forbidden Forest were being courted. If those beings were not won over, they would likely join Voldemort. On the wizarding side, there were unstable elements that needed contacting. Among them, Johnny Silverhand was the largest unknown. His influence reached abroad. He had many followers. Snape had even heard a bombshell. The Star Disciples who hunted Death Eaters were Johnny Silverhand's people. That suggested a possible alliance, at least a shared enemy. Snape was led into the ancient pureblood manor that had come into Johnny's hands, and as a keen observer, he noticed the subtle wards. When he saw Johnny, the man was not the same Johnny from the Triwizard Tournament. Snape's heart sank. Tang Mi closed the door and left. Only the 2 men remained in the study. Mr. Silverhand, Snape said, testing the waters. His position was ambiguous. Dean of Slytherin, undercover for Voldemort, and, or so he claimed, on Dumbledore's side. He did not know whether Johnny's hostility to Death Eaters was sincere or a ploy by Voldemort to sacrifice some followers to gain trust. Voldemort had been silent for too long. A hidden enemy was the most dangerous kind. Johnny's voice cut through the quiet. Severus? Snape? Chapter 233. A low, hoarse voice filled his study. Severus Snape nodded once without changing his expression. He'd seen Johnny Silverhand at school. Even without speaking, knowing his name wasn't surprising. John only chuckled once and asked flatly, "Tell me, Severus, why are you here?" "A collaboration, Mr. Silverhand." Snape was shrewd. He hadn't specified whose cooperation he meant. If Johnny Silverhand had connections to Lord Voldemort, Snape ought to know his cover identities. A clever Slytherin move, self-preservation at its finest. John almost applauded the tactic, but there was no time for games. He rubbed his ring and said, clearly impatient, "Severus, I don't like beating around the bush. Speak up before I lose my patience." Forced to be direct, Snape said, "Mr. Silverhand, I've come to remind you, Lord Voldemort has returned." "So? You should understand what that means. We must cooperate." John smiled. He knew Dumbledore hadn't told Snape his true identity. Did Dumbledore think Snape as head of Slytherin would persuade him? John raised an eyebrow. Why? Snape blinked. What? I mean, why should I cooperate with you? John asked, patient and cold. What's in it for me? Mr. Johnny Silverhand, Snape began with a curl of sarcasm. That's Lord Voldemort. John waved a hand. So what? Snape opened his mouth but was cut off. John's voice was mocking and indifferent. What makes you think I'm a good person, or that I'm obligated to help you? Stung, Snape protested, but John continued. Don't forget there are many ways to live in this world. Do I have to abide by what he calls justice? What right does he have to demand it? He didn't have to name Dumbledore for Snape to understand. The head of Slytherin's face darkened. The meeting had gone nowhere. Snape turned to leave. Severus, John called him back. Snape paused and looked over. John lounged back in his chair, lazy and casual. I heard you want the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, he said. Before Snape could reply, John added, Good luck. Snape took it as a belittling joke. His desire to obtain that post was no secret. He simply scowled and walked out. No sooner had Snape left than Tangmi slipped in and whispered, Piers is here. John waved her off and told her to bring him in. The head of the Auror office, Piers Pocus, entered with a practiced smile and a deferential bow. What John respected about Piers was his tact. He knew how to flatter without overstepping. As the head of a powerful department, Piers could humble himself to visit Johnny Silverhand in person and carry out his orders. John smiled. My friend Piers. Mr. Silverhand, Piers said politely, coming forward. After you've applied, the trip to Azkaban is scheduled. We'll be waiting for your arrival tomorrow. Piers showed no resentment, only the ingratiating professionalism of a man accustomed to serving. John decided to encourage him. Amelia is a strong woman. It can't be easy working under her. Piers' expression flickered with awkwardness. He wasn't a hardliner like Scrimgeour and didn't handle forceful personalities well. This situation will change soon. You'll have your chance to do something meritorious. John's hint moved him. Since taking office, he had little to show for it, and his future was uncertain. Mr. Silverhand, your generosity humbles me. Piers resolved to cling to the opportunity. His career needed it. John merely said, You earned this. He didn't tell Piers that old Barty might be making a big move. He trusted that a clever man like Piers would figure things out. With the trip to Azkaban scheduled for the next day, John shelved the matter of the golden locket once more. Snape had hit a wall with Johnny Silverhand and gone to report to Dumbledore. Dumbledore listened to John's attitude in silence for a long time before finally saying, Contact the others. We need help. And so Dumbledore set about restarting the Order of the Phoenix. He would have to recruit people again. Chapter 257, Azkaban and Lestrange. The North Sea was a living thing that day. Gale-force winds drove thick black clouds, and waves rolled and smashed against the island's sea-scarred cliffs. On that rock stood a square, fortress-like building older than most histories, Azkaban. Under the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, it held the kingdom's most dangerous wizards, men and women so vicious only Dementors could keep them in check. The Dementors floated above like tattered rags in the wind, and today they were restless. Oz noticed their unease. The Dementors seem afraid of something, she murmured as she led the Aurors and Piers to wait at the dock. The Aurors muttered among themselves. They'd been waiting half an hour, and none knew whom their boss expected. They wanted to ask, but their rank held them back. Oz had lost count of how many times someone had poked her shoulder. She turned and gave a glare to the young Auror. Despite her own stalled promotion and the helplessness it brought, Oz treated her subordinates kindly. She joked with them and didn't brood over slights. Her friend Rippy had been sent on a secret mission. If Piers hadn't guaranteed Rippy's safety, she would have feared the worst. As another storm cell rolled in, a carriage finally appeared in the sky. One young Auror whispered in confusion, How is that carriage flying? I don't see any horses. Oz glanced at him and saw only a green young face, someone who still hadn't truly seen death. To her, the answer was obvious. 6 Thestrals were pulling the carriage. Their gaunt bodies and flapping wings brought with them an unmistakable sadness. Those are Thestrals. I envy you for not being able to see them, she said quietly. Only those who had witnessed death could see Thestrals. Once you had, you'd never wish otherwise. The carriage descended onto the platform. Piers, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment, shoved through the wind and opened the door with a fawning air that set Oz's teeth on edge. The waiting Aurors craned their necks, guessing wildly. Was it Amelia Bones inside? Their speculations were shattered in an instant. When the door opened, a silver mask clung to the passenger's face, unfazed by the gale. The mask's owner, no one in the country could fail to recognize him, was Johnny Silverhand. "What is he doing here?" Oz asked, confusion clear in her voice. She was so surprised she didn't notice Tang Mi beside him at first. John looked the Auror team over. "What's going on?" "Mr. Johnny Silverhand," Piers said with his habitual respect, "the prisoners of Azkaban are dangerous. This is simply a precaution against any attempt at violence." "A very cautious arrangement," John agreed, though he doubted prisoners drained repeatedly by Dementors would have much power left. The Dementors themselves were more the concern. John stepped forward and noticed Tang Mi staring at a woman among the Aurors. After a moment, he recognized who she might be, one of Tang Mi's friends, perhaps the squad leader. "Who's she?" he asked casually. Piers followed his gaze and answered, "Mr. Silverhand, that's Auror Oz Healed." "She looks very sharp," John observed, and Piers immediately took notice. Chapter 234. He thought he could give Oz a new post when he returned. There were still empty slots in the office. Sometimes life was cruel in that way. Everything you'd spent so long chasing could be undone by a single word from someone else. "Stop staring. Your eyeballs are about to pop out." John caught Tang Mi lingering and called him out. Tang Mi snapped back to reality, his face flushing bright red. It was hard to imagine the captain of Johnny Silverhand's security team looking that embarrassed. Under Pierce's lead, they entered Azkaban. The place was worse than John had expected. Bare stone walls, Dementors gliding on their endless patrols, the air filled with despairing wails. Every so often a prisoner would break into wild laughter, clearly unhinged. Even the story of Hagrid nearly being sent there made his skin crawl. Pierce's face had gone a shade paler as they stepped inside. The Aurors kept tight watch while the Dementors drifted past. John's expression gave nothing away, though others had no way of knowing what he was thinking. They were led to the cell where a Lestrange was kept. The door opened to reveal a man huddled in a corner, gaunt and hollow-eyed, a threat of madness in the look he gave them. Rodolphus Lestrange. He'd probably just been disciplined by a Dementor. The man exuded a broken, defeated air. The Aurors waited by the door. Inside the cell, it was John, Pierce, and Tang Mi. John's glance at Pierce was enough. Pierce, perceptive as ever, stepped out and said he had to arrange the security deployment. "Rodolphus Lestrange," John said, his tone casual. "You look truly haggard." For a moment, a brutal thought flashed through John. How tidy it would be to end Rodolphus now, so that if Voldemort ever tried to reassemble his followers, one would be missing. He kept his face calm. Rodolphus's voice, thin and hoarse, asked, "Who are you?" Rodolphus had been in Azkaban too long. He didn't even know the name Johnny Silverhand. John smiled without humor. With a flick of his right hand, he forced Rodolphus against the wall. He cast a summoning charm and pinned the man in midair. A small knife appeared and sliced his arm. Blood welled, and John collected it in a bottle. Rodolphus gasped, paling, and the moment he began to black out, John set him down. He pressed both palms to the filthy hair and let dark threads of magic thread into the man's mind. Rodolphus's expression went blank. John asked about the vault. In that dazed, hollow state, Rodolphus gave him everything. When it was done, John produced a power of attorney. For an instant, a flicker of resistance crossed the prisoner's face. Then it smoothed into the same zombie-like compliance, and Rodolphus signed, even adding a handprint. But John didn't release him. He had seen this man in the Longbottom's memories, one of the torturers who had broken Neville's parents. John pressed his hands to Rodolphus's skull again and wove a different spell. A seed of suggestion rooted deep in the prisoner's mind. Once it took hold, the seed would someday sprout and cause an odd, useful effect. It was a little gift John would leave for Lord Voldemort. As John turned to go, a wild laugh came from the next cell. The voice was frayed with madness, even under the Dementor's draining touch. "Who's confined in there?" someone called. "A madwoman," came the answer. "Bellatrix Lestrange." Through the grated door, John caught sight of eyes that never stopped staring. He only shrugged. "A very interesting person," he said, and walked away. His job here was done. Oddly, the Dementors avoided the spots where he moved, as if they were wary of him. Chapter 258, A Fool's Errand and a Fake Horcrux. Back at Silverhand Manor, John planned his next moves. He needed to go to Gringotts to transfer Lestrange's funds, and more importantly, he had to examine the locket he'd taken. But the locket's contents changed everything. When he tried to open it, a note slid free and fluttered to the desk. The handwriting was quiet but deliberate. "To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be killed." Arabe John stared at the note until his chest heaved. "R.A.B.," he whispered. It was the name he dreaded and hoped never to see. He stared at the locket as if it had become poison. "This is a fake," he said hoarsely. He lost it. Rasping laughter and sobs tumbled out of him until they blurred together. The study exploded with motion. Books knocked over, furniture battered, a vase shattered. His eyes were wide and red, consumed by a vengeful, hungry look. He had thought he'd secured a Horcrux, and now he found it was a joke. Worse, in chasing it, he'd missed the chance to rescue Heinrich. "R.A.B.," he roared. By the time Tang Mi forced his way into the room, John had clawed his way back to something like composure. The study looked as though a bomb had gone off. Tang Mi stooped to pick up a shard of the broken vase. The instant his fingers touched it, the shard crumbled into dust. "Shattering spell?" Tang Mi murmured, stunned. He had never seen one so powerful. John closed his eyes, then opened them and flattened his expression. "Nothing," he said. "Just a small problem with the magic. Getting angry now would change nothing." He packed the locket away and forced himself to think. He didn't know who R.A.B. was, but whoever it was had stolen the real Horcrux and intended to destroy it. If the note was true, perhaps the Horcrux was already gone. But a gnawing doubt remained. So few knew of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Could R.A.B. have been someone Voldemort trusted? For a man like Voldemort, secrets like that were guarded jealously. Not even Severus Snape had known every hiding place. Someone who had betrayed Voldemort from within. What did that mean? Set that aside for now, John told himself. He needed a clear head. Tang Mi took the pause to report other news. "Old Barty's campaign is rolling," he said. "Momentum's building. He'll start the official processes next week." Old Barty had been moving quickly, gathering popular support and prestige. He was close to the final step, if the timing held. Tang Mi hesitated, then added, "There's also a letter for you." John opened it. It was from Damo Alex, always hungry for recognition, announcing that his paper on the blood curse had entered peer review. The Order of Merlin had taken notice. Damo had been polishing that research for years. He'd turned a topic John had once worked on into something that might shake the wizarding world. If it passed verification, it would be a major achievement, perhaps enough for a second-class Merlinian medal. John allowed himself a small, rare smile. He did a useful thing, he said softly, tucking the letter away. Remef, Chapter 235. John remembered the time and casually set the letter on fire. He hadn't been home in a while, 2 weeks since he left Hogwarts, and his family had been a little worried. Thinking of his parents lifted his mood slightly. He'd left things in Tang Mi's hands, especially the Death Eater bounty missions. Since the bounties went up, a number of hidden Death Eaters had been exposed. John never intended to wipe them out all at once. He preferred to make them riddled with holes so he could better carry out his plan. While the Death Eaters were under pressure, Lucius was surprisingly unscathed. In fact, he had been consolidating his power among them. 2 of his subordinates had been particularly useful. One was Rippy, who used the alias Zhuo Gang and had a magnetic personality that let him slip into any group and quickly become influential. The other was Bieber, a former security team member who was determined to make his mark. More than once, Bieber had seized opportunities before Lucius could react, rallying disaffected Death Eaters under his banner. Lucius even singled him out for praise. It would be a cruel irony if Bieber ever learned the truth. His superior and his subordinate were both undercover agents, and he was the one stuck in the middle, completely in the dark. His knack for stirring things up didn't win him much prestige. He was a half-blood, and among Death Eaters, that was a handicap he couldn't change no matter how hard he tried. Still, Bieber consoled himself that his efforts would surely catch Lord Voldemort's attention. Lucius couldn't help but murmur, "Young people are full of vigor." He wasn't exactly old himself. John returned home that day. Mrs. Wick hugged him and cried, harder than he expected. He glanced at the car parked outside and then at his father, Watson Wick, who was trying to look unconcerned. John asked, puzzled, "So your solution was to become the new boss yourself?" Watson looked awkward. He hadn't planned any of it and didn't quite understand what had happened. But anyone who tried to harm the Wicks had met a grisly end. Rumors spread that the family was sweeping up London's underworld. Watson was bewildered, but others weren't. The big bosses, driven mad by brutality and pressure, had been forced to surrender. The shadowy investors who had hoped to install a new Wallace family decided Watson would be the better puppet. Sean Wallace came to propose an alliance. On his way home, he had a car accident and vanished. People concluded Watson had acted ruthlessly to eliminate the last threat. So they pushed money and influence his way and forced him into the position, despite the fact he just wanted to be a law-abiding, ordinary man. John was speechless. He couldn't understand why his uncles had joined in pushing his father into that role. Watson was good at making money, let him manage the finances, but leading an underground organization was a different beast. That morning, John sat with a paper in his hands, unused to the still photos on the page after Hogwarts' moving newspapers. He developed a taste for printed papers over television. One headline caught his eye. "The situation in Bear Country has warmed up a bit." Most of the coverage was about everyday hardships. Bear Country was sliding into decline. After its split, life had become harder. Oligopolies choked the economy. John mused that his uncles had become visibly busy since returning home. They'd left at Christmas when their grandfather called them back, serious-faced when they went. Watson fumbled with a tie that morning, choosing a duller color he thought better suited to his new awkward status. Then he remembered something and slapped his forehead. "John, Alexei left you a gift. I put it in the basement." "In the basement?" John asked, startled. The rest of the family knew the basement was his laboratory and usually avoided it. "That thing seemed dangerous," Watson said earnestly. "But I swear I didn't touch anything you put down there." John glanced at the tabby cat sprawled on the cabinet. Watson cleared his throat. "That's an exception," he admitted. John shrugged and accepted his father's assurance. As John turned to leave, Watson stopped with an unusually serious look. "John, are you all right?" he asked. John blinked. Watson continued, "If you have any trouble, tell me. I'm not a wizard, but I'm your father." Watson, who usually seemed unreliable, had gone suddenly earnest. John felt awkward but managed, "I'm fine." Watson hesitated and then ran a hand over John's hair. "You've grown up. Don't bottle everything up," he said, ruffling John's head. "If it's something at school, big or small, you can tell me." He forced a smile, waved as he opened the door, and left. John reached up and touched his hair where Watson had been. The warmth lingered. Family, he thought, and a faint smile touched his lips. In the kitchen, Mrs. Wick was at the stove, following a recipe with focused calm. The pot was not a flat-bottom pan, but a big iron wok, comfortingly familiar. Flames leapt, but she kept stirring with practiced force, using a technique she called the chaotic whirlwind stir-fry. After a year of practice, she had mastered it. Soon, she set down a plate of home-style food that felt like a taste of his old life. John stared at the dish, then at his mother's expectant face. He lifted a piece and learned it was mooncake stir-fried with chili, 5-kernel mooncake no less. He hadn't expected the ghost of his previous life to make such an appearance. He ate it nonetheless. It was a mother's labor, and it was good. Later, he went down to the basement. The box Alexei had left at Christmas sat where Watson had said. It was large, one of those clumsy crates that clack when handled. John's fingers brushed the nails, and some strange force unhooked them. Inside, however, the box was mostly padding. There was only a single item, a sealed reagent bottle. He lifted it out and peered at the black liquid sloshing inside. A note lay beneath. He unfolded it and read, "If you choose to accept yourself, then drink it." Alexei's handwriting. John thought about the Jovanovic family. Unusual people, even for bear country. They didn't wrestle bears for sport without reason. Even little Aunt Lulu C could fend off a crazed mother bear barehanded. Grandfather wasn't feeble with age. He had the calm, formidable presence of a Dumbledore, except his power was physical strength rather than magic. Maybe that explained why local officials sought his help. Bear Country's situation was grim. Uncle Seriosha had told him about a vice mayor grandfather favored, someone the family might help. Politics could be poisonous. Power transitions often spilled blood in the wizarding world and the muggle one. John put the potion aside for closer study. There were more pressing matters. As the fourth year ended, he'd received a reward: magic blood samples. Several candidate blood samples sat on his table. Basilisk blood, he suspected, would either strengthen Petrificus Talus or carry a petrifying effect of its own. He set to work considering the possibilities. Chapter 236, Unicorns Possess Sacred Magic Blood. Andre had felt uneasy earlier. Unicorns were pure creatures, and he had learned a fair share of dark arts. Alchemies were likely to grant spatial and transfiguration abilities. Jowu's power seemed like a spatial tunnel. With 4 vials of blood laid out before him, Andre considered his options. He wasn't short on offensive power. Spells like the Shattering Spell and Fiendfire were already devastating, and the Goblet's Immortal Flame only amplified his destruction. But the Basilisk's Fatal Gaze promised a different kind of advantage, an ability that could immediately tip a fight. The problem was its reliance on surprise. Once the victim knew to avoid looking, its effect would be reduced. Alchemy's spatial transfiguration gifts were tempting. Changing size through space was akin to an undetectable extension charm. Unicorn blood implied holiness, perhaps a boost to the mind or an enhancement to the Patronus charm. Jowu's spatial ability was extremely powerful too. With it, Andre could slip into and out of Hogwarts at will. After wavering, he made his choice. It's the basilisk. He poured the basilisk's blood into the magic blood. The mixture reacted violently, the venomous blood flowering into the pooled magic. A snake-shaped shadow coiled through the liquid, the color shifting from red to white, then to emerald green. The sight reminded Andre of the potion in the grotto. His stomach turned, but he steadied himself and opened the vial. Closing his eyes, he drank the magic blood in one long gulp. The power raged within him again, but this time he controlled it better. After 4 prior magical surges, he'd learned how to channel the torrent. He drew the silver-veined sword and felt a nascent consciousness within it cry out. Seizing the moment, Andre gripped the sword with both hands and funneled the Philosopher's Stone's magic into the blade. The sword flared like a held sun. Under the flood of magic, runes appeared along the blade's once mirror surface, carved deep and ancient. As the surge ebbed, the runes remained, imbuing the silver-veined sword with a mysterious, venerable presence. It's done. He held the sword with one hand. The blade carried a new weight, not clumsy, but a tangible sign of its advancement. To anyone else, it would feel heavy. Only the recognized owner could wield it properly. Andre smiled. His weapon had moved closer to the level of the Gryffindor sword, though it lacked the same self-awareness. The Sorting Hat, the Elder Wand, and the Gryffindor sword possessed distinct wills. The hat composed songs, the Elder Wand answered to a victor, the Gryffindor sword only recognized true Gryffindors. The silver-veined sword had become powerful, but less sentient. System: magic blood complete. Gained basilisk characteristics: petrification, death gaze, longevity, parcel tongue. Petrification, capable of turning living beings to stone, greatly increases resistance to petrification. Death gaze, anyone who meets the eyes will suffer instant stiffening and potentially death. Longevity, increases vitality and extends lifespan. Parcel tongue, grants knowledge of the language of snakes. Andre hadn't expected the basilisk's effects to be so potent. Petrification, real stone turning, not simply a temporary paralysis like Petrificus Totalis, was terrifying. Death gaze was the main reason he'd fused the blood. Longevity surprised him. In the human world, lifespan was a hard limit. With basilisk blood, he felt he could easily live 100 or 200 years, and given that basilisks themselves could live for centuries, the idea of significantly extended life didn't seem so far-fetched. He wondered briefly if phoenix blood could give an effect closer to true immortality, or if the ancient giant squid in the depths of Hogwarts' Black Lake, rumored to have lived 1,000 years, might offer an even greater boon. He made a mental note to try that later. Parseltongue, meanwhile, was of little practical use to him beyond proving a Slytherin connection. Summoning his status panel, Andre reviewed the changes. Apart from the new enhancements, little else had shifted. He had 5 free points available. His current charms included many at level 5. Petrificus Totalis, boosted by the basilisk blood, had reached level 5 as well. Ancient magic remained at level 3. He still needed more knowledge to raise it. Runes and alchemy were still grayed out. Despite practicing over the past school year, he hadn't progressed enough to activate them. I can upgrade Transfiguration and Shield Charm, he thought. He spent 2 points to push Transfiguration and Shield Charm to level 6. Without a word, he transformed a cup into a lifelike mouse. Transfiguration at this level matched Professor McGonagall's early years skill. The upgraded Shield Charm produced a faint, armor-like phantom around his body that felt solid. Tapping it was like striking real armor. Andre realized that level 6 represented a qualitative change. Level 5 was a ceiling for ordinary wizards. Beyond it required talent and deep understanding. With 3 points left, he upgraded Shattering Spell. It had been the first offensive spell he learned, and the one he used most. Raising it to level 6 altered it significantly. With a thought, Andre extended a white ripple of light that shattered everything it touched. With the charged light at his wand tip, he flicked and transformed the spell into an electrical whip. He experimented further and unlocked several new forms of the Shattering Spell. Ripple, a wide-area wave with somewhat reduced shatter power but massive range. Lightning, a flexible form with moderate range and lower damage, flashy, though less practical. Scatter, like a shotgun, firing many small shattering projectiles for widespread damage. Charge, the most powerful, a focused assault comparable to the original Shattering Spell. He favored the Ripple for crowd control and kept Charge for heavy hits. The remaining 2 free points were set aside as a safety reserve. Andre had been back for almost a week. That day, from the attic, he looked down and saw someone he recognized rushing past below. Is that Dudley? Dudley was changed. He'd lost the extreme fat of last year, but wasn't skinny. He'd settled into a solid, muscular build, flesh turned into muscle beneath the skin. Word had it he'd won the Southeast Junior Heavyweight Interschool Boxing Championship. Andre thought back. Dudley's new physique came from a change in diet and a regimen of exercise his mother forced after he overindulged. He wasn't keen on traditional exercise until a week before Christmas when he saw Andre break a thick tree with his bare hands. That sight lit something in him. He fell in love with boxing. Vernon had initially allowed training only reluctantly, but once Dudley tasted victory, he couldn't stop. In a fight with an older student, he managed to knock the opponent down, only to be overwhelmed by others who joined in, an experience that stoked his competitive drive further. Now he wasn't just a local champion. He'd also signed up for a Junior Cup boxing tournament on his own. Chapter 237. An agent had spotted him and declared him a natural heavy hitter. The remark sent Dudley's reputation through the boxing gym. As soon as he was old enough, he'd be stepping into the ring. All of it, Dudley thought, was thanks to John's diet plan. He also knew that Harry's return meant John would be back too, but John hadn't been around for days. When Dudley finally saw him, he mustered the courage to call up from below. "Hey, John?" John glanced down, smiled, and gave a thumbs up. "Dudley, your transformation's impressive." It was the first time John had praised him, and the compliment felt better than a championship trophy. Dudley punched the air and ran off to meet friends for training. He was still a bully at heart, but he'd stopped picking on little kids. He wanted tougher opponents now. John watched him go with a small swell of pride. "I need to study that potion," he murmured to himself and headed for the basement. A sharp bang cut through the afternoon. Car horns blared, and the neighbors stuck their heads out windows. John frowned as lingering traces of magic reached his senses. Apparition? Apparating in a Muggle residential area in daylight was bad enough. From the sound, whoever had done it wasn't very skilled. He'd been greeting Dudley and hadn't noticed anyone suspicious outside. The wards in the house hadn't been triggered, though. Whoever had just apparated wasn't looking for him. Only two wizards lived here, John and Harry. Not my problem, he told himself, and walked away with a neutral expression. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Vernon Dursley coming outside, apologizing to neighbors, saying he'd accidentally hit a car. Down in the basement, John's expression grew serious. Most of the substances on his workbench were ordinary, but a handful were extraordinarily rare, and one simply could not be tested at all. John's alchemy was highly developed. Calling him an alchemy master wasn't an exaggeration. Potion masters were uncommon, but not unheard of, while true alchemy masters were rarer still. To reach John's level, 6th level, was exceptional. 7th level practitioners were nearly mythical, typically well over 80. John had only known one 7th level alchemist, his teacher, Nicholas Flamel. Of the founders, Godric Gryffindor had some alchemical skill, but was better known for weaponsmithing. Salazar Slytherin's talents were hinted at by the chamber he left behind. For an item to be unidentifiable even to John suggested it might not be from the magical world at all. What was it? Why did Jovanovich have it? Jovanovich's family puzzled John more and more. Had his grandfather been a wizard? Alexei had clearly discovered something and left this potion behind. As he debated the possibilities, a magic sigil on the basement table activated. The map projected onto the table showed the outside world rather than the house. It was almost dark, and a figure outside looked familiar, but stripped of its clothing or form. Dementor? Near the park, Dudley finished training and was heading home when Harry appeared. "Hey, bro, D." "Oh, it's you." Dudley didn't want to linger with Harry. He'd used to treat him like a punching bag and was still wary of that wand. "When did you become Bro D?" Harry asked. "None of your business." Dudley turned to leave. "That's a cool name," Harry said, falling into step beside him. "But to me, you'll always be Dada Baby." Dudley's fists clenched. Vernon had warned him not to start trouble with Harry. Vernon had taken John's words seriously, but Dudley still held on to old resentments. Harry had been stuck at the Dursleys lately and felt boxed in. He'd been told not to go out by those who cared about him. Hermione, Ron, Sirius. He couldn't get to the burrow. He felt trapped and alone, and it made him bitter. "So who did you beat up tonight?" Harry pressed, his grin gone. "Another 10-year-old? I heard you roughed up Mark Evans 2 nights ago." Dudley bristled. "He deserved it. He insulted me." "Oh, really? He compared you to a pig walking on 2 legs?" Harry snorted. "That's not an insult, Dada. That's a fact." Dudley's face twitched. He wanted to punch Harry's mouth for its smell and its constant goading. Harry, meanwhile, kept venting the confinement and isolation he'd been feeling. They turned into a dark alley, the same one where Harry had once seen a large black dog, a place with no streetlights. Dudley considered beating Harry here before he could get his wand out, and Harry kept provocation up, apparently daring him to make a move. Suddenly, the air turned cold. The sky dimmed as if the light had been sucked away. A dreadful numbness crept into their chests, like someone had taken their eyes. Dudley thought Harry was playing a trick and fearfully swung a punch. The blow landed on Harry, knocking him down and making his wand fly free. Harry nearly blacked out from the force. Dudley's new reputation as a future heavy hitter was not exaggerated. Hooded figures glided out of the darkness. Dementors. 2 of them moved toward Harry and Dudley. With no time to retrieve his wand, Harry was pinned against the wall. The Dementor began to draw at his happiness, poised to take more. Then black threads rose from the ground and wrapped around the Dementor closest to Dudley. The creature screamed as the threads tightened, dragging it toward the shadowed corner of the street. The second Dementor halted at the sight, startled. In that moment, Harry rolled, snatched his wand, and shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" A brilliant silver light erupted. It drove the Dementor back, but as it tried to flee into the shadows, the Patronus faltered, as if something watched from that darkness and held the light at bay. The silver glow dissipated. Harry, heart racing, grabbed Dudley and made a break for it. Left in the alley, 2 pale, silver-white souls drifted for a moment before John's hand closed over them. He hadn't intervened. Harry had reacted in time, but John had been watching. He collected the souls with casual skill and slipped them into a bottle. "Dementors showing up here means the ones in Azkaban aren't exactly loyal," he muttered. He had long coveted Dementor essences. They made excellent alchemical ingredients. He'd refine these into soul potions and send them to Nagini. It was a practical solution to an inconvenient situation. Harry swore he had never felt so strong. Dudley, all muscle and weight, was practically leaning his whole body against him, pressing down so hard Harry's teeth chattered. He didn't like Dudley, but he wouldn't stand by and watch him taken. The black threads had left a deeper chill in Harry than any cold could. Whatever had dragged that Dementor away had felt like a hand pulling someone into a bottomless abyss. A cold, soul-deep fear rose up in Harry and made his skin crawl. Heavy footsteps sounded nearby. He yelped, instinctively raised his wand, and spun toward the noise. Dudley was shoved off balance by the force and landed on his backside. Harry had expected someone to emerge from the dark, but it wasn't a hooded figure at all. It was Mrs. Figg, their odd, cat-loving neighbor. She appeared panting, her peppered hair escaping its net, a clinking string bag of cat food hanging from her wrist. Harry reflexively tried to hide his wand. "Don't hide it, you daft boy," Mrs. Figg shrieked. "There might be more of them around. I'll murder Mundungus when I see him." "Who?" Harry said, confused. He didn't know Mundungus Fletcher by sight. If he'd ever set foot in Nocturne Alley, he might have. Mrs. Figg folded her arms indignantly. "He left. He said he felt a staring and ran off like a coward, though it was only a suspicion. And now, Dementors. Luckily I had Kiki tip me off. Oh, we can't hang about here, Harry. I'm going to kill Mundungus." Harry stared. Mrs. Figg, of all people, knew what Dementors were. He'd been startled enough by the creatures themselves, but this was another surprise. He blurted, Are you a wizard?" "I'm a squib," she snapped. "Mundungus knows everything. How could I possibly have driven the Dementors off? He ran off and left you unprotected. I warned him." Harry thought of the black thread from earlier and asked, suddenly suspicious, "Was that you just now?" "No," she said. "I told you, I'm a squib. What would I do with a thing like that?" She sighed. "He should have been on duty. He promised Dumbledore he'd be there, and he scarpered." Harry remembered the loud crack the night had made and the sudden disappearance, apparition. "So he'd been following me?" he guessed. "Yes," Mrs. Figg muttered. "I had Kiki hide under a car. Good thing John hadn't overfed it. Or it wouldn't have moved. When I got to your house, you'd already gone. Oh, what will Dumbledore say?" She hustled Dudley to his feet and scolded him for staying out in the open. Harry hadn't expected Mrs. Figg to be so fierce. He kept his wand in his hand as she urged them to hurry back to Privet Drive. The statute of secrecy hardly mattered now. She said it was more important to keep him safe than to worry about the ministry's punishments. On the walk back, Harry peppered her with questions. He had visited Mrs. Figg many times and had never known she was a squib. Why had she said nothing before? Mrs. Figg looked apologetic, but explained that Dumbledore had told her only to keep an eye on Harry and reveal nothing else. She'd even been told to pretend to be disliking him so the Dursleys would not object to Harry visiting. That had been her duty. Now all she could do was say Mundungus had failed in his job. "That coward," she muttered. "He promised Dumbledore he'd be on watch. How am I to tell Dumbledore this?" She was fretting because she couldn't apparate to report the failure. Harry offered his owl to send a message. He also thought about the black thread again. If it hadn't been Mrs. Figg's and not Mundungus's, whose had it been? A sudden, loud bang answered him. Mundungus had returned. Mrs. Figg immediately started after him. Mundungus stumbled in, shaking, and shouted, "You don't know how terrifying that person is. If he'd seen me, he'd have killed me." "Dementors! Harry encountered Dementors. You useless coward!" Mrs. Figg cried, and the net bag of cat food thumped Mundungus across the back. He flinched. "Dementors? Here? How could?" "Be grateful he's all right," Mundungus said, covering his head with an arm. "Did you drive them off?" "No," Harry said bluntly, looking the man over. "Someone was there. I don't know who." Mrs. Figg stopped battering him with the bag for the moment. She urged Harry to get home quickly. Mundungus hurried off to tell Dumbledore what had happened. When they reached Privet Drive, Mrs. Figg did not follow them in. She had done what she could and headed home to wait for instructions. Harry and Dudley trudged back to the house. Harry didn't notice a pair of eyes watching from a dark attic window over the street. "He really is a treasure," said the watcher softly. John stood at the glass, expression unreadable. Dumbledore had looked after Harry from the start, arranging much of the boy's life, an attention that deserved hatred and envy in equal measure, John thought. Do you imagine you can arrange everything perfectly? He murmured with a cold smile, glancing toward the direction Mundungus had fled. Normally, John would have tolerated Mundungus's antics, but he did not want a spy planted in Silverhand Johnny's affairs. He had already been trimming Mundungus's responsibilities, letting others take over his work until the man felt he was being trusted, while in truth, the next step would be to push him out. I didn't treat you badly, John told the empty room, but you don't know gratitude. He watched an owl fly toward the Dursleys and decided to see how this would play out. With a thought, he slid a disillusionment charm over himself and settled to watch the commotion below. Back inside number 4, Vernon and Petunia were a fury. They stared at Dudley, shaken but unharmed, and Vernon's temper broke completely. He roared at Harry. "What did you do to my son?" "Nothing at all," Harry said. He looked at Uncle Vernon, finding that the man's complacent pretense had fallen away and left only raw anger. Vernon and Harry were shouting when an owl battered against the window with a bang. It thrust a leg through the glass, clamped stubbornly to a rolled parchment. Harry scrambled to free it and unrolled the letter, clutching it as if it were a last lifeline. He read the ministry's handwriting and felt the world tilt. "Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that at 23 minutes past 9 this evening, you performed a Patronus charm in a Muggle-inhabited area, in front of a Muggle. This act is a serious violation of the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, and therefore you have been expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The Ministry of Magic will soon send a representative to your residence to destroy your wand." Harry's face went blank. Cold and empty slid through his mind. He had been expelled. He could never go back. Vernon kept shouting, but Harry barely heard him. His thoughts lurched to the part about destroying his wand. He had to get away before they came for it. He had been warned before in his 3rd year. Why had it been allowed then? Of course, Fudge had been there. Fudge had protected him that time. He tried to run, but Vernon's voice cut through, furious and demanding explanations. "Get out of the way!" Harry snapped and raised his wand. John watched him, thought catching on the boy's desperation. Another owl crashed into the window at that moment. This one clung to the sill with a small message, and Harry untied it with shaking hands. It was from Arthur Weasley. Inside was a note. Dumbledore had gone to the ministry to investigate the incident and had instructed Harry not to leave the Dursleys, not to use magic, and to surrender his wand only if ordered. With that written there, Harry felt steadied as if a rope had been thrown to him. John sneered inwardly. Dumbledore claimed not to want power, yet he used it to protect and to command all the same. Harry no longer wanted to bolt. He calmed and explained what had happened to the Dursleys, and when he said the word Dementors, Petunia went pale. "Dementors?" she whispered, and Vernon listened, stunned, as she told them they were the guards from Azkaban. Before they had sorted any more, a 3rd owl arrived, this one from the ministry, and this time the news was less dire. They would not destroy his wand or expel him immediately. The expulsion was to be discussed at a hearing. Until then, he must remain at the Dursleys and attend the proceedings. Harry let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. The fight was not over, but for now at least, his wand was safe. Chapter 239. Harry breathed a sigh of relief. He knew Dumbledore wouldn't stand by and do nothing. Vernon, told that Harry would not be expelled, didn't know how to feel. Part of him feared Harry's retaliation, part of him simply wanted Harry gone, far away. Another owl arrived, the 4th one, flying in from the kitchen fireplace and stirring up dust that made everyone cough. This time, the owl carried a message from Sirius, insisting over and over that Harry must not leave the house. John was already tired of the theatrics. The savior gets into trouble, then anonymous protectors appear, then an uncle from the ministry shows up, then Dumbledore himself, and finally his godfather arrives. "He's truly precious," John said, perched on the sofa with half-lidded eyes as he watched the farce. Harry felt a little put out by Sirius's tone. He had driven the Dementor away himself, and no one had said, "Well done." John could see the expression and found it amusing. If it had been any other wizard, even a pure blood, he wouldn't have received this level of coddling. Harry had been indulged so much he was becoming picky. Look at him. The savior Dumbledore has painstakingly raised. John propped his cheek with one hand and watched with interest. The so-called savior was getting arrogant. When others feared to say you-know-whose name, he would blurt out, "Lord Voldemort," without restraint. Seeing Vernon and Petunia so frightened that they hushed themselves, he even felt a little smug. Vernon considered driving him away, and at that moment a fifth owl flew in. It had been a lively day. This one wasn't addressed to Harry. The owl carried a red howler with Petunia Dursley's name on it. Harry told her what it was. Vernon immediately tensed, ordering her to throw it away. Wizards, in his eyes, were no better than dangerous men. Petunia, seeing her name, looked frightened. The howler hadn't opened yet, but smoke began to curl from it. She panicked. Flames licked the envelope, and she shrieked, flinging it away. By coincidence, the envelope sailed directly toward John, who caught it. Just as it was about to scream, John clapped his hands together and silenced it. The sound became nearly inaudible. "Remember my last words?" "Petunia," said a familiar voice. It was Dumbledore. John rubbed his hands together, and the envelope turned to ash instantly. Everyone stared, slack-jawed. To them, the letter had simply hung in midair and then burned to smoke. "Where's the sound? Why is there no sound?" Harry asked, puzzled. Petunia clung to a chair while Vernon hugged his wife. Dudley, roused, stared vacantly into the room. John, knowing there was no more spectacle to enjoy, left. Revert. In the attic, golden light gathered around a pile of ashes. At a speed visible to the eye, the ashes coalesced back into a red envelope, a howler. John looked at it, thoughtful. Dumbledore had sent this to Petunia Dursley, reminding her of his last words. Petunia was Harry's aunt, the elder sister of Lily Evans. Strictly speaking, Harry wasn't the sole reason people called him the Savior. It had been Lily's ancient magic that protected him and defeated Lord Voldemort. As Lily's sister, Petunia was a muggle. Her only connection to Dumbledore was through Harry. John flipped the howler open, then covered 2 fingers with the ring on his right hand and touched the paper. The howler, which had been ready to explode, immediately stilled. John tossed the letter into his small bag. A book on the table, flipped by a stray draught, began to turn pages. The Tales of Beedle the Bard. The page stopped at the legend of the 3 brothers, and John read the passage about the resurrection stone. A faint light flashed in his eyes. "Death does exist," he murmured, "and the Deathly Hallows exist." He ran a finger along the illustration of the stone and said thoughtfully, "In the story, the resurrection stone brought the second brother's beloved back, but because she no longer belonged to this world, she became sad and distant." It sounded like a con, an illusion that muddled people's minds. But John didn't think so. Perhaps the second brother used the stone wrongly. He relied on the stone's power alone, summoning a form that didn't truly belong to the living world, and so was rejected. If one could infuse the summoning with the power of time and of the soul, combining forbidden magics, maybe it would be possible to truly recall the dead. It was only a conjecture. The requirements would be difficult. At minimum, the power that had banished that ice box, and also the resurrection stone itself. He pocketed the idea. The next day, the Dursleys ultimately did not expel Harry, but they treated him with coldness. John glanced at them and paid them no more attention. He went to Silverhand Johnny's shop. Mundungus Fletcher wasn't there, probably watching Harry at Privet Drive. John picked up a quarterly report casually. Silverhand Angel Investment. He scanned it. Aside from the Weasley twins' joke shop, most projects were still in the investment stage and wouldn't pay off soon. His eyes fell on one project that had already received continuous funding of 3,000 galleons, but produced essentially no return. The signatory was Mundungus Fletcher. "I want to kill you, and you hand me the knife," John muttered. He chuckled, summoned Tang Mi, pointed to the project listed as Chubby Surfing Training, and said, "Investigate this thoroughly, then fire Mundungus." After a beat, he added, "And don't forget to make him cough up the money." Chapter 263. Lupin and the Werewolf, 6 Brothers. Greed knows no bounds. Mundungus was greedy, disloyal, and forgetful. John had warned him not to touch the fund, but he had. That meant he couldn't stay. John told Tang Mi to dismiss him, and if Mundungus couldn't repay the money, to send the security team to his house. Mundungus returned late that evening, past 9, pleased with his comfortable life. How different from the days he had no place to sleep, sneaking into a bar to watch the World Cup. Harry, meanwhile, was confined to his room by the Dursleys, receiving only 3 meals a day at the door. Life had slipped back toward its old forms, and Mundungus felt his burden lighter. He no longer had to pretend to be a caretaker. "Hey, don't you remember me? Aren't you supposed to bow?" he crowed, borrowing the prestige of being associated with Silverhand Johnny. He set petty rules. Staff must greet him when they saw him. The security team gave him no face, but some of the shop staff had been obedient in the past. Today, though, they merely sneered. He grew angry. He had been around a long time and expected respect. "What's that look?" Mundungus snapped. "Apologize to me right now." He watched as one by one the staff bowed and feared he had finally won. But then he realized they weren't bowing to him. He turned and saw the silver mask already in front of him. The familiar sight made him drop to his knees. "Respected Mr. Silverhand," Mundungus fawned, lowering his posture until he was flat on the ground, sweat beading on his brow. He dared a furtive glance up. His boss gave no sign of easing. "Mundungus," John said, his voice hoarse beneath the mask, "do you remember what I told you?" Mundungus broke out in a cold sweat and stammered, "Mr. Silverhand? It seems you truly forgot." There was no expression under the mask, but Mundungus felt anger like a physical force. An invisible hand seized him and pulled him up. A choking pressure squeezed his throat. The sensation was suffocating, stomach-turning, very nearly enough to kill him. "You were too greedy. I already gave you one chance." Mundungus writhed. He couldn't form words, his body twitching like a fish flopping on the shore. He was finished. He remembered now, this was how it had been before. He regretted his greed. Too much comfort had made him forget who he was. After helping Silverhand Johnny land the World Cup advertisement, he had let himself believe he could get away with anything. The truth was he was still a petty thief, easily broken. Chapter 240. Just as Mundungus thought he would stop breathing, the grip around his throat released. He greedily gulped air like a man granted a pardon. "You're fired, Mundungus." The words were like an executioner's sentence. Mundungus froze, then scrambled to Johnny Silverhand's feet, crying, "Mr. Silverhand, I didn't do anything. Why are you doing this?" "Didn't do anything." A sneer hid behind the mask as Johnny tossed a report at Mundungus's face. When Mundungus saw the title, Chubby Surfing Training, he knew he was finished. He couldn't even cry properly. He looked ridiculous, like a clown. Johnny stared at him. "Give back everything that belongs to Silverhand, Johnny. Everything you own is confiscated." That single sentence reduced Mundungus to his former state. No amount of pleading helped. Johnny kept no useless tax. Mundungus was dragged off looking like an orphan. They stripped him of his Silverhand Johnny uniform and threw him, naked, out into the street. Tangmi's voice was cold beside Johnny. "You'd better get the funds back quickly." Funds? Mundungus shivered. Where would he get funds? He'd spent it all. He had bought a shipment of flying carpets because Jin had said they were planning to import some goods to sell. After the purchase, he learned those carpets were banned from travel. Such conspicuous means of transport were now illegal in the country. The batch was unsellable and rotting in his hands. That meant Mundungus would have to pay out of pocket. If he had the money, he wouldn't have used a fake project to swindle Silverhand Angel Investment. It was over. He wanted to run, but the memory of Johnny Silverhand's terrifying influence stopped him. If he fled, he'd be dead by the roadside within 3 days. He couldn't think of a way out. Despair spread through him. Everything he'd built that day turned to bubbles. He regretted his greed. Old Barty's election was approaching, and Johnny now held an application form for a counselor position representing the werewolf community. The community fell within Johnny's jurisdiction. After some investment, the place had progressed. They'd opened a kindergarten and created jobs for werewolves. A werewolf-run massage parlor was particularly popular. With the advent of Wolfsbane Potion, some of the hatred toward werewolves had eased, though it could never be completely erased. Johnny didn't expect to eliminate prejudice entirely. Even among Muggles, discrimination by skin color is stubborn. His goal was political, to use the community's power to secure votes for Old Barty. The first step was to give werewolves real representation. Electing a werewolf counselor, a leader responsible for their welfare, would be a strong force. Its potential was enormous. Many in the ministry advocated ending werewolf discrimination. Werewolves differed from house elves. House elves were born that way and had been reshaped by war. Many werewolves had been forced into their condition, especially the young ones in the community. Though the main culprit was in Azkaban, many young werewolves remained victims. As long as they retained human thought, many would fight for their place. Johnny visited the werewolf community in person for the first time. He had previously left it to his subordinates. It looked less like a mere community and more like a clustered village, like Hogsmeade. Old Jack was ecstatic when he heard Johnny was coming. The handful of boys he'd adopted also came out to see him. They'd all been bitten and raised with some anti-wizard bitterness, but old Jack had taken them in and steered them straight. To them, Johnny Silverhand was a savior who had fed them and given them work. Mr. Johnny Silverhand. Old Jack bowed, respect in every line of his face. He looked older than when they'd met. The massage parlor he'd opened to employ werewolves had given him stature. His magic wasn't strong, but his standing in the community was high. Werewolves treated him like a leader. "Old Jack, this place is lively," Johnny said with a smile and helped him up. He looked around approvingly. Old Jack had done well. Then he handed over the application form. Old Jack's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, is this true?" he stammered. Werewolves who had suffered such discrimination could one day win a seat in the Ministry of Magic? Johnny chuckled. "That depends on you. The ministry will inspect the community soon. Put your best foot forward." They didn't need to stage a miracle. If the ministry saw that the werewolves had restrained themselves, that would be enough. Still, old Jack kept thanking Johnny. After Johnny experienced a werewolf massage and left, old Jack remained in high spirits until someone knocked at the door. When old Jack opened it, his face fell. The visitor looked thinner and more worn than during Johnny Silverhand's heyday. He wasn't in a suit, but in ordinary clothes. Lupin met old Jack's wary glare with a bitter smile. "I'd like to talk to you," he said. "Talk about what? You ungrateful fellow. Mr. Johnny Silverhand gave you a job. How did you repay him?" Old Jack bristled, beard trembling. Werewolves were proud to work for Silverhand Johnny. Lupin's departure from the store had angered old Jack. Lupin had come under orders from Dumbledore to recruit werewolves from the community. Dumbledore knew that once you know who returned, werewolves would be targets for recruitment. Like giants, werewolves could form a powerful fighting force. He had, however, underestimated something. Werewolves were different now. With financial help from the Silverhand Johnny store, many werewolves had changed. Old Jack had also just received the counselor application form from the ministry. This was a chance to change Werewolf's status, a chance he would not hand over. Old Jack started scolding him at once. "Siwen, show him out." Escorted, Lupin had to submit to being led away by two of Old Jack's charges. Old Jack had adopted 6 werewolf children: Chudai, Jack, Zuofei, Siwen, and Tai Luo. Chudai, the eldest, had become a werewolf while receiving magical education and now ran early childhood programs in the community. Zuofei trained with a werewolf security guard from Silverhand Johnny's store, aiming to be a security captain. Jack was the first to enroll at Hogwarts. The 6 were known around the community as the Werewolf 6 Brothers. Lupin felt helpless at Old Jack's attitude. Once friends, Old Jack had given him shelter and clothing in his worst hours. Lupin remained grateful. Old Jack was not bitten by Fenrir Greyback, nor was he a victim. He had chosen to stay in the community to help its young werewolves. The place was better now, less full of hatred toward wizards. That was why Lupin wanted to protect it even more. If Voldemort came, the werewolves would be at risk again. More and more werewolves were gathering there. Their force could not be ignored. Johnny Silverhand was a mystery. Who knew whether his ambitions might rival Voldemort's? As the second king, suspicion was natural. The day after being turned away, Lupin returned. The Order of the Phoenix had sent a message. This was his last chance. After today, he would go with the others to collect Harry. The Dementor attack had put the Order on edge. As the savior who had defeated Voldemort once, Harry's safety was everything. This was Lupin's promise to Dumbledore and to James and Lily. He and Sirius swore they would lay down their lives for Harry if it came to that. Old Jack had just finished supervising Tai Luo's homework when there was another knock. His smiling face vanished. Just as he started in with a scolding, Lupin said, sincere and weary, "Old Jack, can you give me a few minutes? After this, I won't bother you again." Old Jack swallowed his reply, glanced at the sleepy child inside, stepped out, and closed the door. "Speak. What trick are you up to now?" "Old Jack, I want to know why you're resisting," Lupin said, voice thick. "I've told you, you know who is back, and Dumbledore can guarantee your safety." "Dumbledore," Old Jack said impatiently, "he won't let my children get fair treatment." "But Johnny Silverhand is dangerous. He's a dark wizard. He's killed many people." "Shut up," Old Jack snapped, furious. To make Lupin leave, he decided to show him something he thought would settle the matter. He turned and beckoned Lupin to follow. The two of them moved through the streets of the werewolf community, one after the other.